All righty, guys. Thank you for bearing with me. I had a one heck of a little incident this morning. I had an ingrown toenail, as y'all probably saw in my live story that the gracious Vietnamese ladies worked on and got me taken care of, and I was able to get back in time to meet up with Mr. Darrell Elmore, also known as Moe. He was a sergeant. Well, in Vietnam, I should say, because he has a long, as we'll learn, a long historic career. But he was a sergeant, I believe, E5 when maybe I think he said 64, 65. But before I mess anything else up, I'm going to go ahead and get it over to Mr. Darrell for the morning. Mr. Darrell, I hope you're having a good morning. Everyone's been looking forward to this. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, I hope it's not going to be disappointing, but I'll start off by saying that my military career started when I was about 3, and my dad had me leaning up against a tent with a Springfield rifle across me. And I knew at a young age that I really wanted to be a soldier, even though I got out of the Army once, I came back in. I started, I guess you could say my real career started when I was about 14, and I was what you might call a mascot with a unit in the 49th Armored Division, Texas National Guard. And I went to summer camp, and I would shine boots and sweep out tents. And the guys would take me to the ranges, and I got to shoot all the stuff and learn to drive tanks and things like that. So it was great adventure. Today, they'd put them all in jail for child endangerment, probably. But I was, hell, I was even picked to go and be on their rifle team one time because some guy got sick and I wasn't even in the guard yet. And we went down to Brownsville and fired a M1 rifle match. And then I joined the guard when I was 15 by faking my documentation. And then I decided I liked it. I went to basic training and came home from basic and said, maybe I like the Army. So I went and enlisted in the regular Army in November of 56. And I didn't retire until 1994. So I hung around a long time.
I mean, that's for sure. And guys, I need to. I'm not sure if I've linked it or not, but I will link it into the show notes. He had a wonderful sit down with Nick Brockhausen and is it Jeff Miller, his
Yeah.
writing partner, Jeff. Jeff is also a very experienced special forces man, but not to the extent that that Mr. Darrell and Nick are on SOG-wise and Delta and all of that. But Mr. Moe, like he said, I mean, you can see from a very early age he is set up and basically from an early age knows he's going to be in the military. One thing I found out listening to you speak to Nick is before we even get to the SOG stuff, you kind of covered how early you got in. You're faking your birth certificate to where you can actually join the military. It's where was I here? Oh, the different things MOSs you went through. You went through being a tank. You wanted to drive tanks.
I was a tank crewman.
Tank crewman. You were, if I'm not mistaken, you were airborne with the 82nd, and you were a rifleman for a while. AIT, and I think you ended up doing Army Security Agency work for a while.
Yeah, that was after I got out of the Army. I went in. I enlisted. Well, I was in the tanks in the National Guard, and I knew that I didn't want to stay in tanks. So when I went in the Army, and I had a friend of the family who I thought the world of. He was in the 187 Airborne Regimental Combat Team in Korea. And I was kind of infatuated with the idea of parachutes. And so when I enlisted in the Army, I went airborne unassigned. I was terrified I'd be put in something besides infantry, but I didn't have to worry because they needed people in the infantry. And I went to the 82nd Airborne Division after basic training. And in those days, the 82nd used to run their own advanced infantry training within the different regiments. And when I got there, it's kind of interesting. I first was assigned to M Company 505. And when I walked in, the first sergeant gave me a platoon sergeant, and the platoon sergeant took me to the barracks, and all the bunks were rolled up. and everybody's sitting against the walls. And I said, "What's going on?" He says, "Well, we're alerted to go to the Suez Canal." And I said, "Oh, that's cool." And he says, "Come on, let's go." He says, are you qualified with a carbine?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm qualified with a M1 carbine, grease gun, a few others." He said, "Okay, great." We went to the supply room, drew my field gear because they did it there in the company in those days, and went back to the platoon barracks and got my gear put together. And I was assigned to be an ammo bearer for the recoilless rifle, 57 recoilless rifle. And I asked him, "Well, what about advanced infantry?" He says, "Well, you'll get it in the airplane." I said, "Okay." I said, "What about jump school?" He says, "You'll get it when you go out the door." And, I'm 16 years old. I'm stupid as mud. And I say, "Oh, that sounds cool. I won't have to mess around all this time. I'll get right into it." And but then it all settled down. And then I guess they were changing things in the regiment. And next thing I know, I'm in E Company in the 2nd Battalion. And it was kind of interesting there to be a real minority because the triple nickel, the 555th Parachute Infantry Unit that had been an all-black paratrooper unit in World War II had been disbanded. And large numbers of the guys from that unit had been put in the 505. So all the NCOs and a great percentage of the troops were all black troops. And so I was not just a minority. I was a leg and white in a unit that was not. And the lowest form of life in an airborne unit, of course, is a leg. And that went for a little bit. Then they decided that Charlie Company was going to be the training company. And I went to Charlie Company and went through AIT. Finished AIT, and they put me into D Company, which was a weapons company. Each battalion had a weapons company. And I went to the machine gun platoon, where I was trained to be a machine gun crew member on the air-cooled and the water-cooled 30 caliber machine gun, which was really, machine guns were my love from then on. I was a goddamn good machine gunner.
And you mentioned you were saying it's wild that you were still using the water cool, but I mean you mentioned graciously how much you loved that thing, and as long as you had water and belts of ammo, that baby'd rock and roll until the wheels fell off.
Well, sustained rate of fire was 250 rounds a minute, so put that in consideration. Of course, the water-cooled machine gun even had an indirect fire roll. I mean, there's things about it that soldiers today never heard of. I mean, it was designed to provide overhead cover to advancing troops, and it was designed to make it an area denial thing by just firing random fire into an area that was, in defilade. It was quite a system, but it wasn't very flexible. And when they reorganized the Army the summer of '58, the water-cooled guns went away.
And before we head on to the next part, what ended up? I know there were several more considering we're early on. What immediately replaced the water cooled 30?
Well, we just kept the air cooled Browning 30 calibers, and then they had the A4 okay. And then the A6, which was the one with the bipod, the shoulder stock, and all that stuff. So it became a more flexible mobile gun. Across the, each platoon had 2 machine guns in, and that was a 230 caliber air cooled. You had a rifle platoon had 3 rifle squads and a weapons squad, which is 2 machine guns and a 3.5-inch rocket launcher.
Wow.
AKA bazooka.
Sean says, like you said, it was considered artillery in WW1.
Well, in fact, my dad was an H company of the 3rd Infantry before the war, which was the regimental weapons company in those days. And those machine guns had mule-drawn machine gun carriages or caissons to carry the ammunition, because they were used for so many different things in the post-World War I Army.
Wow, that's amazing. Anthony had a little thing. A lot of the triple nickel went into 2nd Rangers during Korea.
Yeah, they had a Ranger company that was an all-black Ranger company, and those guys from the start were superior troops in selection and training. And when they got to Korea, they made a real reputation for themselves, because they fought their ass off. They did stuff with a platoon that a company couldn't do and stuff like that. So they had a great reputation. And then I think when they disbanded them, they were incorporated to the 187.
I believe so, and that'll come up. But while we're right here, considering you're in the perfect time frame, and you also were around for a very long time, I get asked this questions. It's a bit of a two-parter, so I'll break this up. One, were you noticing? And I'm sure there were, but a lot of the black viewers. Anthony is trying to do one of our viewers that just commented, as you saw. He's really interested in the African American SOG, man, and he wasn't aware that there were any. And by God, there were a lot of good ones.
Well, in Omega, Project Omega, when I joined them, half of Omega was already moved to SOG, and the other half was still in the country. We were running missions basically along the border, and the SOG guys went on across the border. But in Omega at the time, we had a guy named Lewis. His nickname is Mang Lewis because he had a Chom team, and all the Choms names start with Mang. Mang something, Mang Lot, Mang Ku, whatever. And then we had Spruill, which was one of the Recon team leaders. And they were both, well, I'll use African American because I think that's what most folks are using today. But we called them, they were black guys, and I'm a white guy. And so my vocabulary is going to reflect my age and experience.
I was about to say, you don't have to worry about PC stuff, whatever said.
Well, anyway, these two guys were top. In fact, Lewis had to quit running Recon because his team was coming out, and with the D model Hueys in the upper highlands, they were really weak, and it didn't take much for them to start losing power. If that happened, the crew chief just cut the ladder loose or the McGuire lines loose, and that was it. Saved the airplane at the expense of the troops. And which is it's a hard pill to swallow, but we all understood it. And Lewis and one of his guys just decided before they cut it loose, his whole team was on ladders. He and one of the yards jumped at over 100 feet off the ground and went through the trees. Both survived it without serious injury, but Lou's back was messed up big time, and his point man had all his front teeth knocked out by a branch, so he looked like Andy Gump. But these guys were top-notch soldiers, and there was nobody. I'll tell you what, there might have been some racial stuff in the Recon guys and stuff like that, but I never saw it in those units. We didn't have time to mess around with those social things. We were too busy being a cohesive unit. And we supported each other, and they support. There was no divisions involved. And when I got up to FOB2 with SOG itself, we had a couple guys up there, and I never saw or heard anything against them. I mean, it's unfortunate, but you have people who are raised and indoctrinated with racism when they grow up, and they don't lose it in some ways, but at the same time, they don't practice it when it's in practical. I mean, in the 173rd, years later, we had some of that stuff, and in Germany, I had some of that to contend with, and it was just it's just an unfortunate part of it.
Yeah, later in the years, it seems like, especially for the more conventional grunt units, they had a real issue. But talking to you guys, I've never come across any SOG man who looked at a man and judged him off his religion or his race. It was always what he did in the field and how he conducted himself as a man.
Well, yeah, with Omega and SOG and in Delta later, I never saw any. A lot of times you would have the junior guy as a team leader because he was the best and the most experienced, and he might have an officer carrying the radio. Although, interesting enough, in Omega and all those teams, and in Delta, the team leader or the senior advisor carried the radio because we were small and we weren't out there to fight. We were out there to look, and we fought if we had to. But our main job was to go out and look, report, and get the hell out of there.
And that's I'm glad we'll be getting into Delta here later on. But before we do that, you've got a really leading up to that one heck of a resume here. Is it not? Am I mixing up to where after where we jumped off? You again, you're a jump master also.
What happened is I was in the 82nd when they reorganized, and the 505 was broken down into battle groups, and they organized new battle groups. And so I was sent to A Company of the 2nd Battle Group 503rd Infantry as a rifleman. It's not in the machine guns. And about 2 days later, they grabbed me and took me over to headquarters company to work in a communications platoon because the platoon sergeant, Sergeant Fox, was intent on making me a commo man. And so I was initially trained to be a field wireman for a while, and all I did was basically run wire, climb poles, and recover wire. And I took a short discharge and re-enlisted to go to Germany just to get back in the infantry.
Could you speak a little bit about Germany? Was that with the 11th
Airborne? Yeah, I went to Germany, and I was the 11th Airborne Division at the time, and I was in the E Company 1st Airborne Battle Group 187th Infantry, which, by the way, was a very well-trained and organized unit.
Jimi Hendrix was in that group, if I'm not mistaken. Jimi Hendrix was.
No, he was in 101st. He never went to
Germany.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
But I got to Germany and they put me in E Company, and I started out there as carrying a Browning automatic rifle.
Wow.
And then over time, I had different jobs. I was fire team leader, squad leader, radio. I carried the radio at certain times, and I used to get called on to zero the 3.5 because you had to zero it every day, and I was good at it. And because the sight would get knocked out of kilter, just a little nickel and dime shit. I was a senior rifleman, and I just did all the different jobs in a rifle platoon. I loved being in the infantry and the airborne infantry. But we talk about jump master before the 11th was inactivated, or after it was inactivated, but before the 187 was sent out, and we got sent to leg groups. I was a PFC E3, and I got a chance to go to jump master school, but you had to have 13 jumps, and we had some guys who didn't really like to jump, so they would pay me to jump in their place. And so I had over the 13 jumps, and I was able to finagle my way into jump master school. So it was very uncommon for a guy below the rank of E4 or E5 to even get into that. And I got to go. And so then I qualified as a jump master when I was there in the 11th. Then I was with them when they inactivated the unit.
Wow. A viewer just typed in and said he heard they reactive. Have you heard that?
Yeah, Anthony, they've reactivated them in Alaska. I think it's 2 brigades under them, and that's the 11th up there. In fact, I was going to write them a letter when they activated and said, "Hey, I was one of the last guys on active duty that had been in the 11th when I retired. In fact, I think I was the last, and maybe I should come up there to your reactivation," but I didn't get around to doing it, and I'm sure they wouldn't have anyway.
And now is this still around the same time to where you end up going through the NCO Academy?
Well, I was on the 11th Airborne Division Honor Guard. The 7th Army NCO Academy used to have a divisional honor guard there as part of the school, and they would rotate around the various units in Europe. And in our case, we went up there and we became, what you do, you did honor guard ceremonies. You were training aides for the NCOs going through there when they needed to march troops around or give commands, and when they went out to do little exercises and stuff. And we also did gate guard duty and internal security, guard duty and all that stuff. So in fact, it was a hell of a job because you were open for inspection 24 hours a day. We basically slept on the floor so we wouldn't mess up the beds. It's that bad. But at the same time, I got selected to be an assistant instructor in the map reading part. And then I was able to go and attend the courses while we were there. And I went through the NCO Academy while doing the other jobs as well. So I might be pulling guard at night, but I got to go to school in the daytime. And that school was by far the most detailed, high standard, professional academic training I ever had anywhere.
That's amazing. And is this also along, because I couldn't tell with the timeline, is this when you ended up earning your expert infantryman badge?
Yeah, I got to Germany in November or October of '57. And then the next late spring, I guess it was, after we came back from Munich. That's where the NCO Academy was then, in Munich, in Jensen Barracks. They had the annual EIB testing, and I took that and passed and qualified. And at the time, I thought it was pretty good a diagnosis of an infantryman, basic infantryman skills. It comprised, well, you had to take a PT test, you had to do a field map reading and compass course. You had to have qualified with your different weapons at different levels. Like if you were crew served, you had to have fired at least sharpshooter. If you and then if you were a crew serve, you also had to fire the pistol. And if you were other guys, you had to qualify. So at least sharpshooter. And then you had to take all these different tests, and every like artillery, adjustment of artillery fire, first aid and combat life saving, chemical warfare, mines and booby traps, prisoner of war handling, and all the subjects that a basic infantryman is supposed to know. And at the time we went through, and there was a road march. You had to go, I think it was 12 miles and carrying a certain load and weapon, and had to do it within a certain time frame. I think it was 3 hours, which it wasn't difficult. It just, if you were in any kind of condition at all, it wasn't tough. That part wasn't tough to us, because we walked or ran everywhere. We didn't ride much in trucks in those days. But anyway, I took the test and I qualified, which was, we had I don't remember what the percentages were, but I really remember that the standards were pretty damn high. And from then on, if you had a CIB or an EIB, then you were always on the committees to give the next guys a test. They've changed it. And of course, everything evolves over time, but they've changed it now that when I went through it, if you flunked one no-go, you didn't qualify. You had to go again the next year or whenever. And today I understand you can fail a couple of them and still get through it. So that's, we used to call it the TRADOG standard, lower the standard and do the statistics to make it look like everybody's doing better. So there was a lot of prestige in those units at the time, because we didn't have many awards. I mean, I only knew one guy that hadn't been in Korea that had an Army Commendation Medal, and he got it for valor. He stopped a runaway machine gun on the line, and that's the only guy I ever saw with anything besides a good conduct medal.
Oh man, wow. So I mean, this is it'll be at least another year before you get your CIB. You got your EIB
well, I didn't get
first.
The CIB until 64. That was 58, and then it was 64 before. Well, I never went anywhere where we qualified for it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Wow. So after that, again, I'm mixing up. I know we're about to be getting into the branch training brag, but I messed up in the ASA aspect of your career. That was after Omega Delta or Delta Omega.
No,
and all
that's
that.
before. That was before.
Before.
Yeah, I got out of the Army. I came back to the States. So, I was in the 24th Infantry for a while. We went to Lebanon, by the way, in 58, and played down there trying to stop a war. That's the first place I ever got shot at, and but couldn't return fire because of our rules of engagement. But I went down there a BAR man, but then I was converted over to being a senior rifleman, and when we went on patrols, a lot of times I ended up carrying the radio for the platoon leader, because the old PRC-10 radio had to be tuned. And apparently I was good at tuning it. I was about the best in the platoon, so I always had to carry the goddamn radio. And then, then the 11th went away. We were in the 24th Infantry Division, and then I went back to the States and went right back to E Company 187. I was in the same squad, platoon, and company I'd been in Germany, because that battle group had rotated back to the States in 59.
Wow. Jeez. So from I mean, I know some of it you can't get into with ASA. I mean, you can basically take guys what you want from that. He's doing security work for the Army.
Okay. The Army Security Agency is basically a signals intelligence organization, and I I got fast talked into going to it because I wanted to go to Special Forces, and the recruiting NCO convinced me that going to ASA, I would get a higher radio qualification, and that would almost automatically get me into Special Forces, which was a lie. And I didn't learn out. In fact, I was in the school for a couple of months, and I tried to quit. And some old colonel called me in and says, "You're going to stay here till you graduate or die, or your enlistment runs out, or you pass." And so I decided to pass. So I went ahead and I started out as a Morse intercept operator. And then later I became a non-Morse, which means I was intercepting all kinds of other signals. And I finished school, went off to a field station. And while I was there, they created a thing called the Special Operations Detachments, radio research units. And then shortly after, they became Special Operations Detachments. And they had one of these assigned to each Special Forces group. And since I was a jump master and airborne qualified, and I had an EIB, I requested assignment to that program, and I got accepted and sent to Fort Bragg in '62. And that's when I got there. And in those days, everybody coming into those units were supposed to go through the Special Forces training and MOS training to get a SF MOS, because we were going to be attached to SF groups and teams. And we were a tactical signals intelligence organization, and we were groundbreakers at the time. We were doing stuff that nobody else had ever tried in our service. And so I got to go to the branch training, and they wouldn't let me go to the MOS school because I had 2 infantry MOSs. I had 11B, 11C, and so they said, "No, you're already qualified." And so that's what it was. And then so we worked with the groups, and we worked on exercise, and we were always called up to augment the teams doing things. And while I was there, I got to go to Ranger School, and I got to go to the Halo School. And then after a while, I got to go to Okinawa to the 400th SOD. That was part of the first Special Forces group. Or in those days, they called it Special Action Force Asia, because they had a detachment of military intelligence, a medical detachment, and an engineer detachment, and a PSYOPs civic action unit. But we were a Special Forces qualified organization. And then when we started deploying to Vietnam, we were on different A camps, and we would help with building the camp and doing our own work. And then sometimes we started patrolling and augmenting the patrols, because it's never failed that the teams would be shorthanded. You always had guys who were sick or injured or rotated, or they had emergencies back home or what have you. So teams were very seldom did you ever get on an A team that was fully up to strength.
I mean, guys, keep this in mind. Like I said, now, okay, he's he's already done with the 11th Air. He's been with the 555. He's was with the 82nd. He's already a jump master. He's gone to Halo School already. He's ASA. He's qualified on the recoilless rifles. He is already an EIB. His EIB even before he's gotten to Vietnam. So I mean, this is outstanding. And not to mention Ranger School right after your branch training, which would eventually become training group, if I remember.
Yeah, it
correctly.
became now it's called the Q course, and they got phases and all the rest. It all evolved over time because demand, all these things change over time. And so what I went through is not the same as what they're going through today. Physically, I think I would have been able to go like they did today, because I went through something equal or more when I was almost 40 years old. So, I knew I could have done that stuff. But at the same time, it's much more developed, and there's stuff they put into the training that we didn't get in school. We had to get it later. We did a lot of cross training in the interims, and things were much more flexible. For example, we could be sitting there in the barracks, and some guys from the PSYOPs unit say, "Hey, we want to learn how to rappel." So 3 or 4 of us would go in, get the ropes and the snap links and all the other gear. We go up on Smoke Bomb Hill to the rappelling tower and give a class and go up there and set it up and start putting these guys through the program. And you didn't have to have a note from your mother. You didn't have to do any of that other crap. Today, if you don't have a note or a card or something, you're not qualified. And we just, if a guy told you he was qualified, we pretty much accepted it unless we knew better.
Wow. And speaking of that, you're let's see, where right before you go, didn't you also end up teaching the officers special forces class as well?
No, I was sent to the field. In those days, the officers went through the branch training separate from the men, the enlisted men, and they didn't have anybody who was a communicator. So when they went to their field exercise, they had to be augmented with a radio operator. And I used to be sent down to be the radio operator with those guys. That's when I learned that the majority of the officers coming into special forces in 1962 and 63 were not volunteers. They were detailed from their branch. And
Okay.
not quite, and some of them were not very happy about it.
I was just fixing to say, I can imagine you ran into a few that weren't happy at all being stuck over with special forces.
Yeah, I could tell a few stories over a beer or two about a few people by name.
I may have, next time we meet up or we cross paths, I may have to buy you a few beers to hear those stories.
I'll keep that. The guy's probably still alive, that one of them. I mean,
I understand.
But it was
okay.
it was a different time, and all these things are at different times. And so, 63, I ended up going to Okinawa to the group of the first group, and then I got there in November. It's funny. I wanted to go to their Vietnamese language school. They told me, "You're not going to Vietnam." And then in January, I went. The following January, so I was there from January to July. And came back to Okinawa. I was at several different camps. I was at Minton and Suida and Trang Sup, where I made my first actual combat assault with helicopters, and where I first got ambushed close. And that was my first tour where I earned a CIB based on our duties and everything. And I came back to Okinawa, where I was detailed to be an instructor at jump school and jump master school. And then in December, I went back to Vietnam, and I came out in April, just before the Marines landed. No, March, before the Marines landed, and had to do some training. And I went back on a project that still remains covered. And
oh, wow, it's still hush hush.
It's still classified, but I was there until I guess it went to July of that year.
Do you have any idea if it'll ever be opened up, so to speak?
I don't know why it's still covered, but it is. So I can't talk about it.
Absolutely.
But I will say this much: it was interesting in that during that period, I became a helicopter gunner.
Oh.
And did some other stuff because the guys didn't have clearances and things.
Oh, wow, man.
But then we came back, and I got back to Oki in 65, and I got to go to now it's combat diver school. I went to the scuba school there, which kicked my ass, let me tell you.
I remember you telling me them stretching you out and really putting you through the paces.
Those first days of PT, those stretching exercises, the next day I was on fire.
Unknown caller.
That was one of my favorite things to hear, and I can imagine those early scuba schools. They were pretty hardcore.
Well, it was a tough course. I got to turn this stupid phone off. As somebody I don't know. Yeah, it was a tough course. It was different because the scuba training has changed over the years, and some schools had more, some had less, but I don't know who the hell was calling me. It's from New Mexico. It's probably a scam. But getting back to the school, it was, and we did closed circuit, open circuit, and we also had demolitions that would drop in other schools, and then we got it back, and we did sub training, lock-ins, lockouts, and stuff. And it's demanding, and most of the guys that failed it did not fail physically, though. We had a few that failed physically, but they failed, for example, they couldn't do the math to figure out explosive charges. We had some guys from the 173rd Recon platoon, and several of those guys just couldn't do the arithmetic. It just didn't register.
Mm.
And but overall, we had a attrition rate, but some injuries and some things. And by law, I should have failed because I had a sinus blowout one time, and it came up with my mask full of blood and mucus. And if they'd seen it, they'd have washed me out, or at least recycled me to another course. But I took my mask off underwater, and well, what happened is I had to do porpoising because my sinus is blocked up. And we were doing what they call free ascents. And I had to go down to, I think it was a 30-foot or 35-foot bell. So I just kept porpoising until it cleared, and I went down to it, and coming back up, it was blocked out, and finally it blew. And it was funny. I took my mask off, and all the blood came out, and all these little bitty fish came out from under a dock and started eating all that blood.
At least with your little misery there, you're contributing and helping out the other little animals out there.
Well, I guess I've been blessed with some screwy what they call station tubes, and like when I was in Halo school on one drop, I kept, you're equalizing going up, and when you go to higher altitudes, you have to pre-breathe. Just like when you do with closed circuit, you have to pre-breathe and purge your system from excess nitrogen, et cetera. And so we go off the aircraft and we're in free fall, and all of a sudden I can't clear my ears. I can't re-equalize. And that left ear was just like somebody was sticking an ice pick in my head. And you should have heard it when it finally blew. It sounded like somebody had let the air out of a tire. But if I didn't tell them that happened either, because if they'd have heard that, they'd have probably taken me out of the course. And that's common among the guys in SF, I think, is that they just don't admit they're getting hurt because they don't want to be left out.
Man, so we are, I believe we're getting to the point where you are. Let me see here. I've got all my notes mixed up.
Well, okay. Guys. After I went back to Vietnam in '66 for a short PDY.
Before you get into that, you had one funny story, and it really adds to your character. And I think this is when you came back and you were an E5, but you had been told over and over again, you're in for E6.
Oh,
the money's in the bank.
This was in '66, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
I was working down in the Delta on a project, and I got a message saying, "Hey, Moe, you made E6. Yay, sew them on." So we came back into Canto, and I found some stripes, and I sewed them on. This is when we still had sew-ons. And I go back up to our base, and the guy says, "Not so fast. There was a mistake made. You didn't get promoted. Take them off." So I took them off, and I went out to the field again, and another month or so later, I get the message, "Hey, you made it this time." So I come back in, take them off, and it's not there. So I said, "Fuck it." I took them off, and it went on for a while, and then finally they said, "Oh, you've made E6 this time." And I says, "Okay, I'll put them on when they pay me for it. Otherwise, I'm not gonna mess with it anymore." Well, something like that happened to me for E7 as well, but I got screwed over because of an admin error.
Always something. I was surprised 3 times. I mean, 3 times it happened.
If it had gone one more time, I think I'd have probably just left. I got on a bus and went to Cambodia. But anyway, I went back on '66, and about that time I was able to finally get out of the ASA altogether, and I went to the Straight Special Forces in the spring of '67. And
where'd you go Special Forces
wise? Well, I was B Company of the first group, and then in May I got my PCS to Vietnam, and I joined the 5th in May of '67. And that's kind of funny too, because I get in the Trang, and I'm walking in, and this guy comes up as a buddy of mine named Joel Keith, and Joel says, "Hey, oh, good to see you." I was a staff sergeant, of course. He says, "Why don't you come over to Omega and run recon with me?" And I says, "Yeah, okay, why not?" So I went over there, and I walked in there, and I got interviewed, and they says, "Yeah, we'll sign you up." I said, "Great, but I got to go in and sign in the group." And he said, "All right, well, go on over to group headquarters and get checked in." So I go over there, and there's an acting sergeant major, and this guy is infamous in special forces. And what I'm telling you now is this is a real story. This is not funny. I walk in, and he looks up at me, and first thing he does is look at my wrist. And I had bought the first Seiko dive watch when I was in Okinawa, but for some, I don't know what happened to it. It disappeared somehow. And I'd bought another Seiko. And he looks at me and he says, well, hi, hello there, Sergeant, blah, blah, blah. You look like a young man who could use a good watch. And I looked at him, and he'd been in Okinawa before. I knew him by name, but I'd never known him personally. And I knew he was associated with a couple of the Higa pawn shops on Okinawa. Higa being a very common family name. And in fact, we used to nickname some of the Okinawans as Joe Higa, was just a collective, kind of a generic term. And he literally had watches on both arms. And then he opens the drawer and pulls out this drawer on the desk. The real sergeant major was on R&R. So this guy was there, and he pulls them out and he goes on about, yeah, you look like a man who could use a good watch. And, we could probably find you a really good assignment in the rear somewhere where you can just take a break for this year and then go home in one piece, blah, blah, blah. And I says, well, Sergeant Major, I've already signed up for Omega, and they said I can work there. And he says, well, shit, I don't have anything for you. Get the fuck out of here. Well, welcome to the 5th group, So I go over to Omega, and that's when I started my training in the recon world.
Now, did you Did you end up running into immediately the legend himself of Delta?
Oh, you mean Alan, Bruiser
Yes,
Allen?
sir. Yes, sir.
He interviewed me later on when that was a year later though.
Okay. I didn't know if you ran into him immediately or not.
Yeah, but he wasn't there long. In fact, he was almost rotating out of there at the time. I got there and checked in with him and reported to the recon element. Downey, I think, was the platoon sergeant of the recon NCOIC.
Oh, Doney, Norm Doney?
Norm Doney, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Pappy Lamar was the commander of Omega at the time, and he was an old, bent-up Korean War vet. And I remembered him from Vietnam because from earlier in '65 in Trang Sup, because we ran a mission that was designed to try to recover some U.S. POWs. This one never made the news because it was too low key, I guess. But he pulled some stuff that I thought was pretty cool. Yeah, that's Doney. But I'll tell you about Lamar. Like I said, he was old, scrawny guy, not too tall. And he really knew how to take care of troops, and he knew how to think. And so we're at Trang Sup, and I'm working the ASA primary mission, and they had a mission come together. They had intelligence that the VC were taking a team around the border with Cambodia back and forth of American prisoners as a propaganda thing to show that we weren't invincible and all this other stuff. And so it was A214, Captain Brown was the CO. They had the mission to try to do a recovery. Well, everybody in the camp was working their own jobs and building and training troops at the same time they were supporting this operation. One element had to go around out by land and cross the river. Come to find out that nowhere, and the nearest big town was Tay Ninh, nowhere around there could they find a piece of rope long enough to cross the river. So then Major Lamar gets a Jeep. They go into Tay Ninh. He gets on one of those, just went out and found a bus, a long haul bus, a truck rather, and he gets on it to take it back to Saigon. Well, somehow he got it screwed up, and he's going to Cambodia and had to turn around and come back. But he goes on to Saigon. Well, nobody's seen or heard anything. We don't know what's going on until a C-47 flies over. That's him. That's Lamar right there in the middle. And anyway, the C-47 circles the camp. And so we say, well, he wants to do something. So we went out, and there's a dry rice fields, and they threw out a smoke grenade. And next thing you know, out comes this parachute with a guy in a duffel bag tied to him. And it's Pappy Lamar coming in with a rope to go across the river. So they gave the rope to that unit, and they took off and went out cross country out to the northwest, and then back over to cross the river. And when they got across the river and they were going to set up the blocking force, the assault, it's called a hammer and anvil. So the hammer element was to take a helicopter insertion and sweep up, and then going to, catch the enemy and catch the prisoners and get them all back. Well, the funny part was that we're sitting there. About 10 minutes before they took off, Captain Brown came in and said, "Elmore, get your shit." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, so-and-so is sick. He's just all messed up. So we got to have a replacement to go with Sergeant Gray to be the second American with that unit." So that's Sergeant Gray, or he was E7 or E8 at the time, I forget, but he was the senior team leader, team sergeant, I think. Anyway, Gray, you didn't send one American out with one of those units then, because the idea was if one of them gets shot in the back, the other one might be able to get back to tell you about it, because we always had to worry about the green on green type thing, or the good guys who we thought were good guys weren't really good guys. We always had either BC or BC sympathizers within the troops,
as they call it today.
So we're out there, and all the CH-21s. Have you ever seen pictures of what they call the banana boats?
Oh, yeah.
Helicopters. They were lined up along the dirt road, and here came a Huey that was going to be the command and control thing with Colonel Carr, I think it was, and a sergeant major named Serby. And of course, we did it right out of the infantry school thing. Guys put out a smoke grenade. He's standing there with a rifle over his hand. He's going to guide the helicopter in, and as often the case, the helicopter pilot decided he knew better, and he flew right over our heads and landed in the minefield. The camp was an old French camp, and it had live minefields around it that nobody was ever clearing them out. And they jumped out, so we were yelling, and they didn't hear us. So I shot my carbine over their heads and got their attention and told them to get back. And then we, motioned to get back in the helicopter, and they took off. And when they did, it set off a couple of anti-personnel mines. But nobody got hurt. It just dinged the bottom of the helicopter. But that was the start of the operation, not auspicious. Anyway, we all boarded up. They came over. We finished up the planning, any changes, and then we boarded up and we flew in there. And that's when I realized I did not like H-21s, because they fly low and slow to land, and even lower. But we didn't have to take off in them, but they were still low and slow taking off. They just didn't have any performance. I had to semi-punch the door gunner to get him out of my way. The guy back here in the door next to the star and bars, because they had a bar across those with a machine gun there and another one up front on the opposite side, just behind the cockpit. And we got out, and they flew away, and we took a few rounds on landing, and we were under fire, and it was very, very low quality. But they were coming close enough to hear the buzz and the snap crack, with the firing. And we started moving, and we went along, and I guess we made contact half a dozen times where they were just delaying us, is what they were doing. We relocate, we deploy, and they would quit shooting, and we move up and all the rest. And we got up there and linked up with the other force, and we didn't find anybody. And in fact, we walked into this one little hooch area with a pigsty, and went inside there, and we found where the guys had been there and had actually used a nail or something to put their initials on the wall and some of the boards, to let you know that they'd been there. And we headed out. That was it. So we started back down the river, and the Vietnamese sent up some landing craft to pick us up. And so, and some sampans, because they didn't have enough for everybody. So command group got in the landing craft, and we put the rest of the troops in the landing craft and on those sampans and headed down the river. And then apparently Charlie knew we were coming, so he set up a mine in the water, which missed. It did splash us with water and hit us with a close ambush. And that was my first true baptism of fire, because we're shooting it back and forth at each other at about 25, 30 feet, which sucked. And nobody got hit. I guess I figured they were probably just ducking down, shooting over our heads, because they didn't want to get shot either. But I remember Sergeant Snyder and I were on the side of that thing, just blazing away for all we were worth, which was new soldiers. I think most of us always wondered what we're going to do when we really get into a gunfight. you know, are you going to shoot? Are you going to not shoot? Are you going to hide? Or what are you going to do? And that was nice to know that I was going to shoot and not hide. And we got down to the end, got picked up, went across and moved back to the camp. And that was the end of that one. And then 2 days later, my team was going back to Okinawa. And that same day, Sergeant Gray went out and got killed in action about 1,000 meters from the camp, which was a real downer for everybody. He was a hell of a good guy too. But then that was it. Went back to Okinawa. And then, as I said earlier, I went to Omega. When I joined them, what happened was half of Omega had gone up to Khartoum and become part of FOB2. They had two programs then. They had Daniel Boone and Prairie Fire. And Prairie Fire was the Laos North. And Cambodia was just opening up and was, you know, Cambodia South. And the Daniel Boone side was what they called non-attributable or deniable. The guys running those missions at the time were wearing NVA style clothing and carrying foreign weaponry. We couldn't carry M79s, had to be all AKs or something else that was from, you know, another country. And another side effect of that was that the helicopters, if they came to get us, to give us support, they could fire machine guns, but they couldn't fire rockets. Yeah, that's me second from the left, and that's Hoppy second from the right. That's Isan Ayun next to me, then the Mang Lot looking to the side, and I can't remember the next guy's name, and then there's Hoppy, and then there's Ikrum Nie, which is my tail gunner. He had been in the French army, by the way, so he'd been around a while. He could run one mission, then we had to let him stay back and take one of the other guys because his health wouldn't deal with it. But they were a good little team, and if you notice the way I wear my hat, that was based on the fact that I found out that when I'm out there and I get tired, my head would go down. So with that rolled up, I could still keep the rain off my eyes, but I could look up when I'm going up a hill or into some place where I want to keep my eyes above the horizon. So many people never look up. They're always looking out at eye level and below, but they don't look up. And that's why, especially in urban warfare, but in combat anywhere, you need to be able to look everywhere. But I'm there at Nha Trang with the new Recon guys, and we were trained. They were taught us the immediate action drill systems and techniques and how to rig our gear, and we learned how to work with the ladders. And one of the big things was only the Recon guys rigged the helicopters for McGuire rigs or ladders. That was not left up to the air crew, and it wasn't left up to any of the support people. That was just the Recon guys actually did that. And I had one time I got bit by it being done wrong by a new guy, in fact. But we did the training out there on the flats behind the Trang, which was hotter than hell. This was May. Temperatures are high, humidity is incredible, and we found some guys you couldn't qualify if you couldn't climb the ladder with your full field gear after you've been running around for a while and drained out. And if you couldn't climb the ladder, you couldn't qualify because they couldn't extract you all the time. So we had a couple of guys didn't make it, but most everybody who did it had the upper body strength to do that. We used the little caving ladders, which were a son of a bitch to climb. And it turns out that the team leader would normally be, the assistant would be at the bottom holding it steady to give the guys climbing it a little bit better purchase going up it. And then, of course, we had the McGuire rigs, which are basically a 120-foot climbing rope with a sling made out of the same kind of nylon webbing that you use for parachute harnesses. And of course, we also had the air crew. They got to ride them too, but just so they'll know what it was like and understand it. And that at that point, the dedicated air and us, we became a single unit. I mean, the links between the air crews and the Recon guys were just like you're all in the same squad, the same team. And there was a lot of.
What air crews were Omega using at this
time?
At
the time, we were down in Nha Trang, so we were using 281st. Okay. But then the guys before we left was let me think. I think it was the one
Thunder.
No, these guys were the bikinis. 170th. The 170th were the first ones. They were out of Camp Holloway at Pleiku. So when we went out to start running missions, we went out to Play Jarang and areas like that for our launch site, set up a base on the side of a runway, and the helicopters would be right there with revetments. And we started out with 170th and flew with them, and then they were replaced by the 189. They didn't stay with us all the time. I think it was because they didn't want the crews to get burned out, because they were living in the same tents and bunkers and stuff we were out there at the launch site. But I'll tell you what, it was a case where if something happened and one of the crew didn't have both the crew chief and the gunner, one of our guys would jump on and just do it to have a full crew to go out. I mean, there was no hesitation doing stuff like that. And then we had the 119th, I think it was, came in, the third one there. And then we went up to Khartoum. It was a 52nd.
The Gladiators.
And I think the 20th SOS had, they were doing mostly the Hornets were doing mostly prairie fire at the time.
CCS, they became synonymous down there at Daniel
Boone's. They went down to Bambi to it. Yeah, later on. But anyway, we started, we ran our missions out there in country. And like I said, we had 6-man teams, 2 Americans, 4 Montagnards. And I went out on my first mission with Jim Miller was the team leader. I was his assistant. And we ran our little recon and did our snooping and pooping and recording and looking and photographing and came back in. And it was a good mission. We weren't compromised. And although things were starting to change by then, but we came back out and Jim told the boss, hey, yeah, Elmore's ready. So I got my team the same day. And that's when I got my own team that you saw the picture of.
Wow. Okay.
I went through a number of assistants. Let me step back a bit. Guys volunteered to go run recon. And it turned out that it wasn't for everybody. It doesn't mean they weren't great soldiers or great guys. It just means it wasn't the kind of thing that they were cut out for. So if a guy volunteered and decided he didn't want to do it, he just unvolunteered and he went away, and that was fine. And nobody said a word against him. I mean, and one of the guys that ran with me, he ran 2 or maybe 3 missions. And then he said, I don't want to do this. And next time I saw him was at the 2 Corps Mike Force, and he was doing fine there, So there was no stigma attached to someone who decided they didn't want to do it anymore. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, just like Tilt and all the other guys say, on later down in the CCN, CCC days, you'd rather the guy tell you outright that, I can't do this, and then get out in the field and endanger everybody. And like you said, no one looks down on them. It's not for everybody. It takes either, like you said, I won't say it, you have to be crazy to do this.
No, I don't think you have to be crazy, but you have to have a certain amount of a certain kind of confidence, I think.
Self-confidence in yourself and the ability to make decisions.
That's part of it. The other part, some of the guys, it was just because they wanted to buck the odds. And, what makes any guy tick is going to be different from the next guy. There's no single answer for that one, I'm sure. Anyway, I ran missions there. It's funny, I only ever ran 1 mission inside the artillery fan. And that was the only time I was in it, and I got a chance to use it pretty well. That was kind of interesting. But then after a while, you're talking about getting promoted. Well, guys were getting promoted to E7, and I wasn't. And we had this S1, this admin officer, a captain, who was a total waste of oxygen as far as I was concerned. And he and I had butted heads a couple times. And so finally he never was out in the field at any one time. He'd never spent a night over anywhere. So he came out one day and I went up to him and I said, well, what's holding up my promotion? Why are these guys getting promoted on waivers and I'm not? He said, well, you're not, you didn't verify your MOS. And I said, oh, bullshit. He just hadn't bothered to check. And I think he held some animosity towards me. Because later on, Pappy Lamar put me in for an award, and it disappeared. This guy left the unit, and the award disappeared at the same time. So, I mean, it's just sour grapes, I guess, on my part. But still, that relates to some things that happened later on. But
Another thing.
Of all the things that I had done, I had a copy of my MOS test scores in my rucksack at the FOB. I don't know why. I never carried that shit around. I pulled that sucker out and I showed it to him. And so that blew his cover. And the next month I made E7, but he cost me about another 4 months in grade by being such an asshole.
Jesus. I mean, and you briefly mentioned on it before we get into some of your other exploits. You mentioned you know, after you got your team, I don't remember the exact number, but you ran through, not ran through, I should say. You had a few 1-1s that just couldn't and weren't cut out or didn't feel like they wanted to do it. Do you remember how many you went that went through it until you found a guy that was all in and ready to go with you?
Well, the last one was we'd have stayed together if I hadn't decided I wanted to take a break, and I'll get into that one when I'm up at Khartoum. But I had guys would go, you know, for 3 missions. One guy went for 1, and then in fact, I was going to fire him anyway when we came back. He basically didn't do his job, and he just got kind of panicky and.
Yeah, not the thing to do out there on a recon mission.
Let's put it this way: while we were at night, and we were hiding because we were being pursued pretty hard, we spotted some activity on the river below us, and we were within the artillery fan, and he didn't wake me up. I was snoozing, and he wouldn't wake me up because he didn't want me to do anything. He didn't want to make any noise. He didn't want anybody on the radio. So, and I didn't find that out until after we got extracted later on. And I was hot enough to fuck. And I went looking for him, and I couldn't find him. I was looking for him hard, and I couldn't find him. And he got on a helicopter somewhere and got out of Dodge. And,
boy, yeah, evidently by those actions, he knew he had messed up. Clearly,
well, he knew it. There was no doubt that he knew it. But the thing was that it was just it made me so angry that he would
keep something from you that important.
I mean, he could have woke me up and we could have decided not to get on the radio because we were being pursued hard. We had guys all over the place, and it was just one of those things. Hell, we saw them up on the side of a hill with a guy with binoculars up there sweeping the area we were in. And so I knew they were serious. See, by the later summer of '67, the counter recon activities, and I know the other guys in SOG will verify this, they were really getting serious. And you were running into LZ watchers that lived on LZs. And as soon as something came in, they were gone. They were gone to notify whoever. And they had units that were designated specifically to counter our teams. And when you got up to crossing the border, that's when the anti-aircraft capabilities started increasing pretty strong about that same time. And when it got into 68, 69, it all had elevated quite a bit.
And I think around this is the time we mentioned plagiarizing and before we do that, I wanted to let people know to really drive this point home. Here at the time that Mr. Moe is running Recon, you've got 6 men, 2 Americans, 4 indigenous running, and they're only using AK-47s. It's not like the later years to where you see anywhere from 6 to 13 men, like on Joe Walker or Archie, New York, with Ed Walkoff and their CAR-15s and all that. So Mr. Moe and his men
at the time I'm talking about, we were carrying M16s, CAR-15s, and we could have sawed-off M79s. R-79s if we wanted to, but that was in country, see?
Yes, sir.
So
yes,
when we
sir.
went up to Khartoum and we went under Daniel Boone, that's when we had to go under the different rules of engagement and different equipment. And
could you speak a little bit about your when you first, as I understood, half or left back and then the other half, because I think you were needed up to go train or do something, but you start getting trained because I think one of your first big missions is a wiretap, isn't it?
Well, what happened was that later, I guess it was late September, October of that 67, the rest of us all went up to Khartoum and joined FOB 2. This was when it was starting to be called CNC CCN and CC Central and all that. And we didn't have a CCS as far as I remember. That was brought up later when they got Bammy to it up and running. And anyway, we got up to Khartoum and we took over, we got indoctrinated into the Daniel Boone program. And I went on my first mission and we never got on the ground. We couldn't get in. It just wasn't going to happen. So we came back and then we came back and I got fragged for another mission. This was going to be a wiretap. And so I got trained up on and I guess I was selected because I had the ASA background and I knew I had used the similar equipment on some other projects. And so I got trained up on it. So that's something else I had to carry along with the radio. And the whole thing was that they had information that the NVA were running communication cables, and they wanted me to go in there and sample it and see. And what we were going to use is like a clothespin microphone. You put it on the cable, and the induction, it could induct the sound off of it. And the tape recorder was designed so it wouldn't run unless there was some traffic going. So if it started talking, it would start recording, and if it stopped talking, it would shut down. And I'm not sure how, there's probably some overlap to allow for, lapses in conversation, et cetera. But so we trained up on that thing. And then we went in that morning and we couldn't get in. We got weathered and shot out, as I remember. And came back and refit. And that picture you had of me and the team was on Khartoum airfield, refueling and refitting the gunships. And one of the crew members took it because I was one of those guys who never took pictures to speak of. And the pilot later sent me that. I don't even know how I got that photograph later on, but I got it sometime later through the mail somewhere. I was in the Mike Force at the time, I'm sure. But
photo of y'all.
Yeah. In fact, Hoppy and I are the only two carrying weapons there. The other guys had been at the helicopter, and we had to go over and do something, get some update on something. And we came back, and that's when it went sour.
There was a question, and I hate I skipped it, but now that we're back on and I need to go ahead and hit it. Jason wanted to know, what were you saying to them to make everyone smile, at least on the far end with you?
Well, I don't know what I said. I think it was something to do with, I was kidding Mang Lot about, hope he had enough food. Because we used to call Mang Lot Walu, which is Rade for Mang Lot eats a lot. Yeah.
That's
Rade. Yeah. Jacques Sanak. I speak.
That's another thing with Mr. Moe. He also learned was it, you said the Rade language?
Well, Rade Jirai are pretty similar, and but I learned enough of it to where they could talk to me about some things. We trained a lot with hand and arm signals because we had no common language overall, and we could use some Vietnamese words and some French words and things like that. Like to the yards, a canteen was a bidon, which is French for canteen, or a sacado is a French for a rucksack. That's what they called it, sacado. Their rifle is a pao prong, pistol is a pao diet, machine gun is a pao automatique. Stuff like that. So it's a mixture of things. And of course, sometimes they would call a handgun a Rollo, which was a version, a specific kind of handgun that the French carried years before.
God, so it's so cool.
It was a complex get along. And like I had Rade, and one of the yards I had that wasn't in that photograph was Sedang, which is a totally different language roots. And then the Mang guys are Chams, and their language is very similar to which one was it? Malaysia, I think. The native language in Malaysia.
Polynesian.
No, it's Malaysia, not Polynesia. And the reason I know that is because one of the guys I knew, Dick Chamberlain, had been on the Peace Corps there. Oh. And he worked with those guys down in the Trang Mike Force, and they thought he was a semi-god because he could speak their language so well. But you have to learn enough to do some things, like the Rade could point and say, crew, Viet Minh, blah show. That would be, footprints, 3 men, VC, or NVA. Well, to them, all Vietnamese were the same. VC, NVA, and South Vietnamese. They were all the enemy to them.
quick, since we're talking ethnicities here, we've got some other questions we'll save since we're on a roll. Any experience with the Chinese Nungs?
Very limited. We had Nungs in Project Delta, and they were primarily in the bomb damage assessment platoon. And then when I was in the Nha Trang Mike Force, we had a Nung company there, but they'd been shot up so badly and couldn't get enough replacements. They had broken them down into 2 combat recon platoons of about 25 guys each. And the only time I worked with them was over Christmas Eve in '69. And I went out with them on their breakdown mission. We were going out because we had intel there were going to be an NBA try to do a mortar attack on Nha Trang that night. So we were out there trying to do counter ambush and counter movement. And they were very dedicated. But again, ethnic Chinese are not the same as the Vietnamese, the Tonkin Vietnamese. I mean, they're Tonkin Chinese, or as opposed to the Vietnamese. They're really an ethnic different group, just as much as the various Montagnard tribes.
Wow. That's one thing so interesting is not only with SOG having the different ethnicities, but the Delta, well, Omega, I should say, and then the Mike Force. Did Delta, we'll get into that coming, but Delta had Vietnamese in there. Was it all American?
Oh, no, it was a combination, but let's wait till we get there. But
yes,
anyway,
sir. Yes,
going
sir.
back
yes,
to
sir.
getting back to Kontum, we went in the second time, and when you're going in, you're sitting there on the edges looking where you're going in, and you know where you're supposed to go, you know what the terrain's supposed to be like. And I'm going in there, and we're low level, and of course the high bird up there is directing the low guy flying nap of the earth, and we're flying low level, and it was strange because we crossed a creek and it wasn't supposed to be a creek. Then we crossed another creek and it wasn't supposed to be another creek. And I said, well, this is something wrong going here. And I looked off and I raised my head and I looked down, and under the trees, I could see a camp. We're down at low, we're getting down to short final, and I'm looking out there a couple hundred meters out there under the trees because they had tied the trees together. It was a camp with barracks and a headquarters building and a parade ground. And I'm thinking to myself, well, hell, this isn't a good thing. There's probably going to be a lot of people around here. And anyway, we flew a little bit further and we got off and moved off the LZ to listen. And we can hear a lot of movement out there. So I started moving, and they were moving, and they never got close enough to really see us, but they were close enough to where we could hear them talking and yelling at each other. And later on, when we got back to the FOB, through a translator, one of the yards said that they were yelling, "Don't kill them, we want to capture them."
Oh, God.
And I'm reading a book right now about MIA POWs, and come to find out that the NVA from the people in Hanoi had directions that they were to take casualties if they could capture alive Americans. So they had a priority to take us alive at the time.
Do you I hate to interrupt, do you remember the name of the book you're reading right now?
Oh, God, it's in the other room right now. I can get it and take a look at it.
You don't have to go now, but whenever you today, if you wouldn't mind, we'd love to read books that you're reading that you find interesting. So
yeah, well, I'm halfway through it right now, and it talks about stuff from after, during the recovery and trying to prove that there were left behind people. And
wow, is it codename Bright Light?
No. This is much thicker. This goes into it starts with the peace accords and how Kissinger sold them all out, and Nixon.
Oh, yes, I think I may know what you're talking about. Yeah. By one of the ambassadors may have written it.
Yeah, but this one talks about it's like a incredible betrayal type thing.
Excellent. We'll look forward to seeing about that. Yeah,
I called for help. Said, hey, I think we're in big trouble. I need to come out of here, because I heard enough movement, enough directions in the terrain. I had no maps that were going to fit it. I was not on a map sheet that fit the ground I'm on. And the recovery guys came looking for me, and they say, "Where are you? Pop smoke." And so we popped some smoke, and he said, "Pop some smoke." I said, "We popped some smoke." "Well, I don't see it." And everybody's yelling, and not yelling, but talking about this and wondering why I don't do this. And I do. And then finally, a couple Sky Raiders came flying by, and and they were orbiting out where I was. So I climbed a tree a little ways, and I got my mirror out, and I got them with my mirror, and they broke and came over and circled me, and I got on the radio and said, "Hey, they called them the hobos then. That's before the Sandys came into operation." I said, "Hey, the hobos are overhead." And so they came over there, and then we found me, and I think I put out a WP grenade that gave them a good shot, and they came in and snatched my little butt off the ground, and away we flew. The enemy never fired a shot, but they were probably within 50 meters when they pulled me out, because we could literally see the grasses being shaken around by them moving in it. And when I said, let me step back. When I talked about this is before I went to Khartoum, I talked about the LZ Watchers. I went in on one mission, and we got off, and when we took off, one of my guys gave me a hand. We used to use this symbol to tell you that it was a deer that had moved, because they had deer and guar and other animals out there. What he was trying to tell me was that he saw two people. There were two LZ Watchers, and they took off. And so we moved maybe 50 meters, and I started hearing, and I'm sure you've read about the tiger hunting in India, when they lines of beaters with gongs and hammers and stuff, and they would come through the elephant grass and chase the tigers out, so the hunters on the elephants could shoot them. Well, I sat there and looked, and when I was listening to all these things, and what they were hitting was like canteens, hollow canteens and gourds or something. But I looked, and I had an angles, where I'm hearing the sound, and it was well over 100-meter wide. A group of people sweeping the jungle trying to flush us out. So that's what I'm saying. They had a well-organized programs already then. And if you came in the wrong place then, they had a reaction force that was on its feet and moving right away. And that's all they trained for. All they were doing was trying to find recon teams. So I don't think anybody's ever discussed that much with you guys, but that was my first exposure to the totally organized. Like when we got up there, I go on that Wiretap mission, we were told by somebody else that they used to have guys would walk along the trail just like they had trail watchers, and they would take and hold the cable in their fingers and run it through their fingers the whole time they were going along. And they came through about every 15 to 20 minutes. So you weren't going to have much of a window to exploit those things. The bad guys they weren't lazy. They took exceptional measures at many times to secure their stuff and to limit our abilities. They appreciated our abilities to do the DF work and all the rest. But now getting back to the extraction, they took me out. They finally got us out. We went back to Khartoum. I went in. I went down to the intel bunker, and right within maybe 350 meters, 400 meters of where I went in was a thing there that indicated the NBA division headquarters was there. And I talked to I turned to the sergeant there, and he said, "Oh, they didn't put that on there this morning because they didn't think you'd go in." And I blew up. I lost my entire sense of humor.
I can imagine. So I mean, you were 12.
I went up to my recon platoon sergeant there at Khartoum, and I says, "I need to take a break. I mean, this is just not working right now. I want to take a break for a couple of weeks. I'll go on, reaction forces or the hatchet teams or whatever you got there, but I just don't want to run recon for a couple of weeks." And he says, "Okay, I got something I need somebody for anyway, and I got you covered." And that's when that was what led me to leaving SOG.
God, I mean, in the end, when you finally figured out what, because I mean, I think you said you went after the guy or tried looking for him and finding him, but weren't y'all 12 clicks completely?
I was totally 10 or 12 clicks from where I was supposed to be.
Jesus.
Yeah, so you take that 12, that's about 6 miles from where I was supposed to be.
Yeah,
and if it hadn't been for those A1s flying over where they were, orbiting off away from where the target site was, I'd probably still be there, or I'd be somewhere up in Hanoi.
God Almighty! That one when you were speaking it with Nick, I was flabbergasted. I could still see the anger when you were speaking to him about that. Totally unacceptable.
What got me was that. Well, first of all, I think what got me was the fact that they should have known, the guys up high should have known where I was going and where they should have put me in. That was the key. And it could have been a very successful mission, but like I said, things were getting hard there starting in that time frame. They were really getting their act together, and I'm sure all the teams that guys you've talked to since then will say, yeah, there were lots of folks out there, and they were organized, and they were willing to close with you quick.
Wow. Here, before we end up getting out of too far away from Pappy Lamar, I found a great little quote about people and what y'all said about him at one of the SOARs. Commander of Detachment B-50 from 2667 to December 10th, 67. He was a recon team leader on Daniel Boone Project, FOB Khartoum. Pappy Lamar, as everyone who served under him referred to him as, was the epitome of what a commander should be. His total support for us was demonstrated daily. We all came to love him. In my case, to look up to him as a father figure. We were told Pappy had been the first sergeant during the Korean War and been given a direct commission. He had 33 years in the Army and was 47 years old when he came to B-50 as our CO, and initially was a major, but shortly promoted to lieutenant colonel. He was well known throughout SF. Everyone called him Pappy with love. Even one time, General Westmoreland visited the base near Dak To, and after this four-star general returned Pappy's salute, he said, "How's everything going, Pappy?" Such was the universal respect seemingly everyone in the armed forces had for Lieutenant Colonel Lamar.
Well, let me tell you what he told us when I first got there. We're standing there, the new prospective recon guys. He said, when you're on the ground and you want to come out, you're the guy on the ground and we'll follow you or back you up as far as you want to be backed up. And if you want to come out, we'll come and get you. And then if we think you're wrong, we'll discuss it when you're in the rear. We're not going to discuss it while you're on the ground. To him, there was none of this break contact, continue the mission bullshit. He took the man on the ground as the man in the arena who knew what was going on. And his loyalty to his troops went to the mountain yards as well. Because in Omega, just like in Delta, they had a thing called the Roadrunners. And these were some tough little guys. I mean, these guys dressed in enemy clothing, and they would go on patrol with a mission of encountering enemy personnel and faking them out, gathering information, and trying to get prisoners. And one of our Roadrunner teams was up along the Saison River. I was in the hole at the time, so I didn't witness it, but I talked to the guys who did, and they got shot up, and I think they had none killed, but I think 2 wounded. I can't remember for sure. I know there were some wounded. And the reaction force was out doing something. So Pappy jumps on the CNC ship and goes out there. He brings it, of course, he's got gunships following, so he's got support with them. So he goes down the ground. He goes down the ladder, starts collecting the yards and sending up the ladder. And he helps get the wounded guy up. And by this, when he finally gets it done, he's so exhausted, he can't get back in the helicopter. So he gets partly on the ladder and hooks himself in and tells them, get out of here. So they flew back with him hanging on the ladder. And they get back and it's all over with. And Pappy, everybody's doing this. The wounded yards are out to get medical care, etc. And Pappy turned to, I forget who it was. I think it was the operations officer. And he says, if anybody puts me in for anything, I'll shoot their ass. That's just doing your job. And I never knew a guy in that project that said anything bad about him from the standpoint of the kind of man he was.
Well, that right there tells you all you need to know about the man, literally.
And he didn't forget you. When I left FOB 2 and I ended up in the Mike Force at Pleiku. I say ended up. I was literally shanghaied into the Mike Force. About when Bami Tuat was being opened up, my company was back out of the field and we were on alert company status. And all of a sudden I get this call or get the word, Pappy's sending a helicopter for you. I said, what? He said, yeah, they're going to do this, because I knew they were building the camp at Bamituit, because some of our teams had gone down there to start it. And this helicopter comes and I go out to the chopper pad and get on it and we fly back to Bamituit. The crew is shit-faced. We're flying along drinking champagne and throwing empty bottles at water buffalo at Nap of the Earth. That's what I need, a bunch of drunk pilots flying Nap of the Earth. That's what we did. We got out there and we inaugurated that thing, and Pappy came to the chopper pad and said, you know, Moe, you son of a bitch, good to see you. Come on in. And so we opened up things, and the next day I got on a helicopter and flew back to Pleiku and rejoined my company in the Mike Force. But he never forgot you. If you were one of his guys, he didn't forget you. In fact, he remembered me from Trang Sup in '64. He couldn't remember why or how. And then later one day we were talking and I told him about that. And oh, yeah, I remember you. You were out there on the chopper pad. You were one of the guys that met me at the drop zone when I came in. You know, he was an incredible guy as far as I'm concerned. And he never got the widespread notoriety and respect from everybody else that he should have got.
When, let's see here. Let me make sure I'm not messing our history up here. You've gone, I'm making sure I've covered the hobos come in, you've get the headquarters. Oh, before we get into your Mike Force era, did you not hook up with a individual that y'all had run out of town who had gone down to 4th Division thinking?
Okay, yeah. When I told you that the platoon sergeant said he had a project for me for a week or two, you know, I said, okay. So what it was, they took a 1-0, me, an op sergeant, a commo guy, and a weapons and a medic. And we were sent down to the 4th Division to help them get their LRP company up and sort it out. And so we were putting together lesson plans and scheduling and organizing SOPs and stuff. And their commander was a captain who was absent doing something. And we were there for about 3 days and actually getting ready to start the training program when he shows up. And this captain apparently had convinced the 4th Division that he was Mr. Recon and knew all about it because he'd been in Special Forces Recon. And it was the same captain that we'd kicked out of Omega. And he took one look at us, me in particular, because he knew I knew him and I knew he knew me. And he went down to the brigade they were supporting, and told them they didn't need our help. He knew everything we did. And so that's when I was going back to Kontum. We got a ride back to the Pleiku Mike Force compound, and there's a chopper pad there that served both the Mike Force and the C team. And to get a ride back up to Kontum, and I'm standing out there on the pad, and this Sergeant Major Lisi walks up to me and he says, "Is your name Elmore?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, come with me." I said, "No, I'm supposed to go to Kontum." He says, "Nope, they gave you to me. I need a replacement for Martinez." And a guy named Guadalupe Martinez, was a buddy of mine, had been killed in action just before that, and they needed a replacement for him. And I became the first platoon leader for Lieutenant Meisner's Mike Force Company.
Wow. And what corps and where was this Mike Force?
The 2-corps Mike Force out of Pleiku. We were based in Pleiku. Is B-20 is the team designation. And later on, the Mike Force expanded to have a company in Kontum and another company down in Quinyon. They were all basically designed, those companies were designed to augment the A teams in that area. Because our job was a reaction force, or to patrol, or to augment camps under construction or under threat.
I swear I had that. I was looking up. So, and also an interesting fact with the Mike Force is that I don't know if everyone knows, but y'all also had Australians in the Mike Force.
Yeah, Omega. When I got to Omega, we had Australians from the Australian Army training team in Vietnam. And most of these guys were SAS, Special Air Service, or commandos. And there was one of them, when I knew him, that was an infantry, just straight infantry. And when we started working across the border, they couldn't support us then. So they were all moved over to the Mike Force. So when I got to the Mike Force, I went right back into a bunch of guys that I'd served with before. In fact, in Omega, we had a reaction team that was I think now it's 2 Aussies and 12 Montagnards, which was a team that was designed to be like a bright light. They were to come in immediately and operate to link up with the recon team and help extract them. And so every time one of the things about Omega, every time you went in, you had a full brief back to the commander and those involved. And part of that brief back was the reaction team. And Danny Neville and I think Danny McClymans were the two that normally did that most of the time. Neville almost all the time. And they would give you a briefing on their procedures and link up procedures. Of course, it was all bullshit on the ground because once the first shot's fired, the plan goes to hell and the terrain dictates and the enemy dictates. But the idea was that my yards wanted that thing done. They wanted it, and they wanted to know everybody knew who everybody was. And it was professionally done. And it was a real confidence builder. And of course, well, I got to the Mike Force. Here's these guys that I knew and I had confidence in, that I trusted. And we worked together a lot. And I mean, I went on R&R to Australia, and they had gone back home, and they grabbed my ass and took me somewhere. And I don't know where I went, but we drank for a week, and they deposited me back in Sydney, and I flew back to Vietnam. But they were professionals. They were professionals and marvelous guys, I tell you.
That's what I like hearing, because a lot of folks don't realize that it wasn't just an American war. The Aussies helped out a lot. The Rock Marines were a bunch of tough, savage warriors. And also to tie in again with the Australians, the 1-0 school for SOG was in the Aussie AO. So a lot of the chopper for final exams would be on Aussie helicopters. So,
well, yeah, that was a long time. I wished I'd have had a chance to go to that, for that matter. I mean, we were given a quick and dirty introduction to Recon and Delta. I mean, in Omega, but later on, I mean, they created a formal course down there that really, I think, would have been great for everybody to have gone through. We just weren't given the opportunity. I mean, my timing was wrong.
With all the schools that were in Vietnam going on, did you happen? You already had Ranger School, but did you have any leadership any schools for that matter that you attended while you were in country?
Well, yeah, well, not those tours. I got to go to one school later on when I was in the 173rd. I went to the Phoenix course.
Oh, wow.
The infamous Phoenix program.
Are you? Is that one of the things you can't get into, or can you share a little bit about what that was?
Get into. I mean, the first part of it is that the Phoenix program was greatly misunderstood by the press and most people, and there were a lot of I think excessives involved with it, and depended on who they worked for or where they worked. But the design of it was basically to neutralize the shadow government that the VC had installed. And the fact that if they couldn't identify and neutralize their effect, then the next thing was to arrest and take them away, or in some cases they had to use force or ambush them and stuff. And then you had the mixture of local government. When I say shadow government, if you had a village chief, the VC had a village chief. What a lot of people understand is that same shadow government would identify the most effective loyal people and target them to be eliminated. So if you expose these people to the fact that everybody knew they were VC, then that had a great extent limited their ability to operate and made them aware that they were targeted and they were being neutralized. Anyway, that was the goal. It was a political goal. And then, of course, you had to have the provincial recon units that were the action arm at province level, and they did a lot of the same things. And some of them were pretty damn. there's always personal local agendas, and we don't often understand it that well. That sometimes these outfits become private armies to somebody, and that's why we had what we would say a round eye as in charge of it. It was under the agency, and I was on orders to go to one of the PRUs, but the same month, U.S. government decided no more uniform personnel at PRUs, and after that, there was some Australians were able to go there. I don't know how they were sheep dipped, but I never got to go and I worked Phoenix programs within my area because I was an intel officer for the 2nd 503rd for a while, and I worked with the district and province people, but I wasn't under the program itself. I just was part of the program.
That's very interesting. I did not know that. There are the guys, I see the questions coming in, and then we'll hit them all. But there were quite a few SOG men, especially from 69 to the 71 time period, that seem to be working Phoenix operations a little bit.
Well, one of my best friends was in that thing. In fact, he's still one of my best friends. We talk fairly regularly. And he was in there before he went. One time he went back over again, and he was there the second tour. And like I say, well, I don't know. It's hard to describe, and no sense going into it in detail.
No. We're and to cover this up, so we don't have to get into any more of it. We're actually going to have we had a Force Recon lieutenant on this past, God, I can't even remember, the days are so busy. I'm so busy. He was on, but we're having part 2. He went from Force Recon to reading a rifle company, and then the CIA contacted him, and he was like you said, he was the last uniform commander of a PRU unit. And weirdly enough, fates and SF worlds collide. The man who was brought in to replace him was none other than Jose. The CIA guy that
Prado, not Prado. He wasn't out over there.
No, not Prado, but it's the other the guy that may have killed Che Guevara. What's his name? Felix Rodriguez, I think. I believe that's the one. I hate I'm mixing up, but he's a legend in the CIA, and but we're gonna have him on, and he'll Lieutenant Colonel Finlayson, I should say. We're gonna have him on to cover the PRU. Okay. But gosh, this has been just amazing. We're still got some interesting stuff to cover. From after that, I forgot we're in the Mike forces now. You replaced an acquaintance, Mr. Martinez, that sadly lost his life. I think you said you weren't there all that long. Can you?
Well, I got there. I joined the Mike force in the end of November or 1st of December '67, and I was with them until May of '68.
Okay, so you were actually there for a fairly amount of time.
I started off with Lieutenant Meisner's company for one operation. And after that operation, we came back and they were going to form a new company. So I was assigned to the new company. We had a captain named Kraxner. He was a Hungarian refugee who joined the U.S. Army. And Kraxner was the company commander to start with. And again, I was the lead platoon leader. And we put them through their infantry training and jump school, where I got to be the jump school instructor, lead jump instructor and jump master. And then we went on operations. And then I was with that company until I left.
I always hear, I've got some Mike Force books that I've got to read, but I've read 2 of them already, and it sounds like you guys were the term quick reaction force is thrown around a lot, but it sounds like you guys were hell on wheels, so to speak.
Well, if you were the reaction company, the guys in charge of that company you just stand by. You're there. In fact, I had a unique, the thing that a lot of folks don't understand is how much you get called on to do stuff that's not traditional. I remember one time our company, this is when I was a company commander. And after Kraxner left, I took over the company. And normally the Mike Force company, you'd have probably 4 to 6 Americans assigned to the company. And normally you'd have 4 when you went to the field, or maybe 5. They like to have 1 American with each platoon and of course the CO, and but it would vary, but different Mike forces were different. And you asked about NUNGs before. The 3-Corps Mike force had NUNGs to start out with. I believe the Eagle Flight, the original Eagle Flight, I believe, was NUNGs. They were NUNGs with God, what's his name? He lives down in El Paso now. I can't think of his name now. Anyway, that's where a lot of the NUNGs were. And of course, there were other ethnic groups that we didn't talk about. Like out in Tay Ninh, we had what they call Kaudai.
Oh.
And the Kaudai were a ethnic, not so much ethnic, but a religious group that wanted autonomy from Saigon. And so at Trang Sup, we had 2 companies of Kaudai. And then down in 4 Corps, they had the Wahao, which were a Catholic group, and Father Wah was their boss, and they were fighting the VC and stuff. So you had other subgroups within that geographic area. The guys in 4 Corps, a lot of them had ethnic Cambodians, and at Minton we had 2 Cambodian companies.
That's amazing how, like you said, the different geographical locations you're going to have, who you're going to have. The Kaudai are very interesting. And as a matter of fact, they're mentioned in the Tay Ninh. That's where Andy Finlayson was PRU.
That's their capital. That's their capital is in Tay Ninh.
They've got the whole, it's almost like a Vatican set up for the Kaudai religion.
And the all-seeing eye, and then they have different Martin Luther, I think, is one of their venerated saints, and Victor Hugo is it's like the Mountain Yards. Some of the Mountain Yards would be ostensibly Christians, but they're also Buddhists and they're also animists. They're whatever works for what they're doing. They figure if you believe them all, one of them
cover your bases, man. Cover your bases.
And we were talking about some of that other stuff too, like the Cambodians at Minton. They were from an element called the Khmer Sarai. And every month they'd get paid, and the next day this little Citron would drive up, and their representative would come over and take their cut of the money and take it back to Cambodia.
Wow. That's why we love speaking to you guys. I mean, you can only get so much in a book, and besides talking to the men who are there, we thank you. And I mean, we're not wrapping up. We've gone a while, but
I really, on one hand, I wish I could have gotten back up to Kontum and continue with those missions. Because we would have gone to Bami Tuat and we'd have picked up a whole different AO. And I will say that in my heart, the Daniel Boone guys up at Kontum were not second-class citizens, but they were lesser among equals.
Absolutely.
The Prairie Fire guys were established, and they seemed to have preference, and they knew everybody and they knew everything. And we were still kind of finding our feet. At least
redheaded stepchild. That's what I refer to y'all as, is the redheaded stepchild.
But as time went on, it became where the lines were blurred, and CCN guys are running CCS missions and vice versa. And I wasn't there and doing it, so I really can't comment other than the guys I know who did it and what they've said. I think the common denominator was, though, that in a sense, one size fit all. If you were a recon guy, 10, 11, 10, 12, 13, if you were running recon and you did it and kept doing it, then you were in a different category.
Absolutely. Different atmosphere from everyone else. And yeah, you're right. They Tilt and them got sent down to Honak To for a while, and that was a weird one. And then the guys up north or down south went up north. A few of them didn't fare well because the AOs are just totally different. It can be weird. But one thing before we start getting into the end of Vietnam and your special work you ended up doing is, I was very curious about back to still with the Mike Force. What did I understand, or did I mess up that you were actually training, getting ready, and you were actually going to be with the Mike Force when they took Nui Kodo?
No, that wasn't me. That was Project Delta that went up Nui Kodo after I left Delta.
Okay.
No, but what I was going to say, I've got one, I think, kind of a funny story about the Mike Force. You might get a joke. Not the one where I captured 2 million piastres. That was a different one. But it was NVA or VC money, and they didn't like it. But we had a good operation. We came back in, and the Mountain Yards wanted to have a celebration. So we drank a bunch of this incredibly bad Nampe stuff, and they sacrificed a water buffalo. And one of them wanted to finish him off, and he wanted to borrow my K-bar. So I gave him my K-bar, and he cut the throat and let it bleed out, and he gave it back to me, and it was just covered with blood. Of course, we're all pretty in the bucket by that time, and I didn't clean it off. I just put it back in my belt, and the next day I had to take some of my yards, and we took 2 trucks. We were going to drive down from Pleiku to Quinyon through the infamous Manyang Pass, of course, to get stuff from the Class 6 yard, soft drinks, wine, and beer and liquor. So we went on down there, and a guy from Supply was with us, and we went by NK and gave some guy there a couple of SKSs and a couple of bottles of whiskey and to pick up stuff on the way back. And we drove on down to Quinyon and went to the Class 6 yard. And we're in there, and I'm hungover from the day before. I'm not feeling good. And this guy, the civilian that ran it, he kept looking at my web gear. And finally he says, and I mean, I guess there were flies circling my damn knife. He says, "Do you go to the field?" I said, "Yeah, I just came out of the field." "Is that blood on that knife?" I said, "Yeah, that's blood, Why?" "Well, my nephew would love to have the knife like that." And I'm saying, "Well, yeah, it's my knife." But then it finally dawned on me, he wants this knife. Maybe we can trade. So the guy from Supply, which was a much better rug salesman than me, he chimes in. And then the guy starts talking about how he could write off 10% of all his stuff as breakage, and he could give away whatever he wanted. So I was talked into giving this guy my knife with the blood that's caked all over it. And in return, we got 1 truck loaded with pallets of beer and soft drinks. The other truck was loaded up to the top of the sides with wine and whiskey. And we loaded up and drove back up to Anke and collected several cases of frozen meat because we had to feed ourselves in the Mike Force. We had to buy our stuff through whatever way we could. And we drove back, and there we got all that to put in our little club. And so everybody, that's how we would make the money to pay for the meals and the food and pay a little cook and stuff at the Mike Force compound out of that kind of stuff. And all that. And so I went to Supply and drew another knife.
Wow. That, and especially with the special forces guys, I love y'all's ability to barter and get what y'all need to take care of your men and the overall group as a whole.
Well, the 2 million piastres I captured, we were setting up a perimeter, and the guy pointed it out, and I drug it in and opened it and saw the money in there. We took that and had to turn it in, of course, but they gave us 500,000 of it back. And we used that to buy sewing machines and an engraving machine and a bunch of other stuff for the Mountain Yard Village. And that way they started to make flags and engrave cigarette lighters and stuff to sell them to help pay the families and feed them and take care of the guys who were injured and wounded and could no longer go to the field. So that worked out pretty good for us.
That's another good one too. Getting all of that. Amazing. And I actually, thank goodness, I don't remember. I've got some photos from SOAR where we took a picture, and then you showed me some of your photos of your next assignment, if I'm not mistaken, to where you were you with the Vietnamese Rangers as an advisor?
When I left the Mike Force, I went to Nha Trang to rotate home. And I got down there and they say, "Oh, we can't find your records. So you're going to have to just let us search for them." So I went over to the club and started drinking salty dogs. And my other good buddy, Tom Schultz, walks in and says, "Hey, why don't you come over to Project Delta and run Recon with me?" And I said, why not? I had 3 or 4 drinks and was feeling brave. So we went over there. We walked over there, and I went in to see Bruiser Allen, and he interviewed me, and we had a little talk. And he says, oh, "Okay, come on board." So I went in, and Schultz took me up to the Recon element and checked me in, and I became a member of Project Delta Recon. And and now, of course, Alan left shortly after, just a couple of days later, I guess, maybe within a week or so. But anyway, they brought in some new guys to the project, and they wanted me to take them out on a shakedown mission. And no Recon there was, we had Vietnamese and Americans mixed, and it was kind of a confused situation. But again, the senior American carried that radio. And so we went out and we did our little thing, and it was pretty much a dry hole. No activity spotted. None of the trails showed recent use, etc. And in fact, that's one picture of me that I was mugging for the camera when we came out. And we came out and went back in, and it's funny that one guy was an E8, the other was an E7. And we got back to E7 and said, "Oh, my back hurts. I can't do this stuff." And then the E8 says, "Oh, I'm too senior for this, so I'm going to go do something else." And I don't know whatever happened to them. But shortly after that, this was in May of '68, the thing called the mini tet in Saigon, Cholan, Jardin broke out. And almost all the reaction forces to this were Vietnamese. And the Project Delta had, like I said, you had the Recon, and then you had the BDA platoon, or bomb damage assessment, and then you had the Roadrunners. And then their reaction force, exploitation force, was the 81st Airborne Ranger Battalion, which were all Vietnamese and led by, really, they were from the Vietnamese Special Forces community. And they reacted and went down, and they had American advisors with them, with each company and with the group, or the battalion too. I think it was a Major Nauman was the senior advisor, and there was like a total of 20 some guys that went down to Saigon as a reaction force, and they got into combat in cities. And there was some pretty tough fighting. They got chopped up pretty bad, and about half the advisors were wounded apparently that first day, and evacuated. So they asked for some volunteers to go down and replace them. And I thought there'd probably be a lot like a Mike Force activity, so I volunteered. I was one of the ones. We had two groups that went down there. I was with the first group that volunteered to go down and replace him. So I joined. We flew down there. I joined the third company, but almost immediately they sent me over to the fifth company, and I stayed with the fifth company while I was there with those guys. And we fought a little bit more in Saigon area. Then we went out and started working the rocket belt and doing patrolling and other kind of reaction type things around there, and filling a gap in the perimeter around Saigon. We fought down there until probably August or so. And then we went back and went back out, went up to Quan Loy and started operating out of there and up in that area by An Loc and Quan Loy. And I stayed with the Rangers then, because this is what I was doing. It's interesting because when I first got there, I'm the senior advisor because there were no officers, extra officers, and Captain Humphus was the senior advisor then, and I stayed as a senior advisor until we got more officers, and then I got a Captain Christie came in and took over for my company. And it was funny at first. He wouldn't carry the radio because he was an officer, and the Vietnamese wouldn't talk to him. They only talked to me because I was the guy with the power. And finally, we linked up with Humphus, and I told him what was going on, and he got a hold of Michael Christie and explained the rules of the day. And he said, "Oh, okay, I understand now." And he took the radio, and he turned out to be all right. He turned out to be pretty damn good. But I consider that time with them very, very good part of my career. And we operated up until October, and that's when we were operating. And that's when I got commissioned. I was E7 one day, and the next day, Tom Schultz and myself and Dave Ryder were lieutenants.
Got some good photos, and I'm trying to find. I'll be doing that while we're looking at something.
Anyway, I got commissioned. They wouldn't allow you to stay in the unit you got commissioned in. So I got transferred, and I went over to the Trang Mike Force, where I ended up with a non-job as the S2 for the Mike Force, because they're a reaction force all over the country. but I stayed with them until I guess January of '69 when I rotated to go back to the States and go to the infantry officer basic course.
Okay. Bear with me. I had one photo right here of you and some of your men. I don't remember if you remember this at SOAR, and I'm trying to get all of them, but these are some of.
Well, that's God. I can't remember who's his name. That looks like shoot. All of a sudden, I'm getting a mind block here on me. Al Greenup, I think.
I think it is, and if y'all can, once we're talking about your next thing, I'll find all of them, and there's really great.
This was
photos.
after I left. They were up, I think, at Mylock at that time, I believe. This is after.
Oh yes,
the project.
I was about to say, because some of them I couldn't read the handwriting on the back with some of the names, and I thought for the life of me one of them said
that may be Stedman.
So if I can find the streak, they've got names on the back, and we'll take care of this. But I wanted to show a photo that everyone knows you by, and if you could, before we get into the last part of your career, this famous photo.
That's the one I said I was mugging for the camera. Yeah, that was when I took those guys out on that one local recon mission out in a Trang, and we were just standing there. I had one 30-round magazine. This is before they were commonly available. And I normally either painted or wrapped the WP grenade in tape. And for some reason, I had to grab it at the last minute. This was a put-together mission. It's kind of funny because I'm carrying my Browning high power on a shoulder holster down where it's below my ammo pouches. And I've got field pants, the old Army field pants that I'd spray painted, and that's fading out. And of course, I got a tiger suit top and my rolled brim hat on top. I took little pieces of parachute cord and sewed it into the hat to break up the outline. So if you laid down and trying to look over something, it didn't have any kind of a fixed outline. It was a random outline.
So you've got your Browning high power, and then is this the is that the one you altered, or is
no, that's a regular M16. I hadn't been in there long enough to qualify for a Car 15. The only guys who always had Car 15s were the guys on the higher staffs.
Okay.
No, this is my regular M16. But if you look at the tape up there, that's because I've got a rifle rod taped to my my forearm, and it's a standard M16. It's a standard M16.
That is one of my favorite photos, and it's probably gotten the most likes of any of my Project Delta and Mike Force or any photos other than SOG. And
I was a photogenic fucker, I tell you. And that was when I was with the that's the modified M16. I found that I liked the M16 lower receiver group. It just felt the better balance to me. As you look at there, you can see I have suspension line tied around the butt of the pistol grip. And we also carried syrettes of morphine in the hollow part of the pistol grip.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
And then, of course, the other thing we used to do when I was in Recon, we would cut the top 3 links off of the safety spring so that you could go from safe to fire without making a noise if you're in an ambush position.
Oh, man.
And I would put a piece of tape, 100-mile-an-hour tape on the dust cover on the other side. So if it did open and we weren't holding it, it wouldn't make a clanging sound. It would just go thump. And you can see I've got a cleaning rod on the tape to the side of that one.
Did you have a new barrel on that?
Well, the Car 15s first came out with one barrel, and then they came out later with a second barrel. And that's just a large flash suppressor that came with the Car 15s. They found that the shorter barrel didn't cycle the weapon very well, so they made it, I think it was 1.5 inches or 1.25 inches longer. And so it functioned better. I never had any problem with any of them personally. Yeah, this is after a contact. This is actually after a contact, and I'm sitting there with a map, so I'm calling in to get the helicopters to come get us. We were trying to get out of there because we got a report that there was a bigger group of bad guys coming after us, and we didn't want to stay there to meet them.
Oh, no, sir. And, I can see why you're getting into the map real quick like that.
And if you could look, I got my compass on my web gear. And down here, you can see I took the old M1 rifle belt, cartridge belt, and I cut them out and taped, sewed the bottom down extensions. And I could carry a 20-round magazine in each one. So that let me carry 10 magazines in separate pouches.
Damn.
And in that day, I had gone through 7 of those magazines in about a minute and a half.
Woo!
Or 2 minutes. I don't know. Time goes real quiet at certain times. But when it was over with, I had to sit down and reload. I carried extra ammunition in my rucksack, so I was able to sit down and reload all my magazines after that. But
I mean,
you see the string that I use for a sling?
Yes, sir. Right.
Well, when I was in Omega and FO, and in the Mike Force too, we used to take a suspension line and tie it between the handguard, the carrying handle, which I never saw anybody use, and you would rotate it around the front sight. And that way you didn't have a sling. We took the sling swivels off, or we taped them so they wouldn't make any noise or snag. But you could release that and just hang it over your neck. And that way you had a way to keep your rifle with you when you were climbing a ladder or coming out on strings.
Man, that is perfect. I see. This is the kind of stuff that all of us SOG freaks eat up right here. This is the bread and butter.
You see that thing there with the arrow?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that was I always carried the larger first aid pouch like the Marine have. And I would carry some additional stuff, just like if I had the big ammo pouches, I used to carry extra bandages or extra ammunition in the bottom and let the magazine set up higher. But I had, on that day in particular, I had morphine syrettes in the butt of my rifle in the pistol grip. I had morphine syrettes in that first aid kit, and I had morphine syrettes taped to my web gear up here on the right side. When I got back to the States after that tour, I found out I had forgotten to take them out of that first aid packet, and I landed in San Francisco with 5 quarter-grain syrettes of morphine in my gear. I was in a cold sweat until I got to a hotel room, and was able to take those things out and discard them.
That I can't imagine what the fear you must have thought walking in.
69, the drug thing was getting bigger and bigger.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't need that. That's for damn
sure. No. The last thing they need is a Special Forces Vietnam veteran coming in with morphine.
You see we're wearing helmets, right?
Yes, very few times I've seen
Rangers, and Delta and the Rangers, we all wore soft caps up until the time they went to Saigon. And they got helmets down there. And, when you're fighting in cities, you have lots of secondary fragments flying around.
Mm.
And so the Rangers decided they liked helmets. And so they wore them from then on. So we had to wear them too.
And I just found some of our before we get into the last part, I've just found your advisor photos. Thank the good heaven above. Now people will have to deal with me a bit because I haven't had a chance to crop them. But
nobody's asking questions, so I don't know.
Oh, we've got questions, but we're gonna save those until the end. I've gone full screen and I don't know how I did that. There we go. Sorry guys. But we've got great questions. These will lead to more questions down the line, but nonetheless, that is what we thought was green up. And
I'd like to point out one thing on that previous picture. That dirt, that red dirt, that laterite dirt, the rucksack that I was carrying in that picture, you couldn't see it. It's down in the weeds. It's in my garage right now. And that sucker is still stained with that red dirt. You can't get that stain out.
Wow. Jeez.
Go ahead on to the
next. That's like the Bammy Toohey mud.
Yeah, that was us getting ready to come back from Saigon after we were rotating back to Nha Trang after that operation. That's McVeigh, the medic, me, up above that's Greenup. That's Al Greenup. I don't know who that was on the left there, but I think it might be Dave Ryder, but I'm not sure.
Let's see. I'll read it out. Yep, you've got it right. You, Dennis, McVeigh, and Ryder. Wow, your memory is perfect. Al That's a club shot.
That's in the Trang. That's back in the Trang, and that's the shoulder patch that some of the Rangers had. They just didn't have a lot of them to go around because the uniforms got wore out, and those troops didn't make shit. One of the most terrified moments of my life was in the Rangers.
That's saying something, then.
Well, the reason I was scared was because they were some tough little bastards, and they killed a lot of folks, and they were very realistic about things, and they didn't make much money. And we're out there in the rocket belt, and I was the only American with them for some reason. And this helicopter flies over and calls down on the radio and says, "Is there an Elmore there?" And I said, "Yeah." "Well, get me an LZ." So they landed. You remember I said they lost my records?
Yes, sir.
Well, he landed and came over and it says, "Here." I said, "What's this?" He said, "Here's your back pay. This is the 3 months that you've been, since you rotated, since you were supposed to rotate, that we lost your records." He hands me 3 months pay in the field.
A sack full, a sack of money.
And all I could think of was, oh shit, I hope we don't make contact and have a firefight because somebody's going to shoot my ass and take my money.
And take this sack of money from me.
Now that's a picture of two of the translators, Mr. Lack, and I cannot remember the name of the shorter guy. Mr. Lack was incredible. His language skills were just wonderful. But the thing was that he had been a very highly paid guy working for some American oil company or company over in Asia. And he was too old to have been drafted, but he quit and joined the Rangers to be a translator with the Americans.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a hell of a good guy. I really liked him. And he was working with me there for a while with the 5th Company until Christie showed up.
Wow. He all of these Vietnamese Rangers and all of that, they look like they were quite the guys.
Well, they were good guys. Like all units, all guys. There's always a problem with. We all have some guys that aren't as good as others, or who's got quirks about them. But a lot of people forget that some of these guys, there was no D-road. There was no going home. You were home.
Yeah, you're living and breathing it right here.
You weren't in that unit by drafting you. You were in that unit because you wanted to be. And the leadership on the Vietnamese side was normally pretty good.
Green up. This looks like it says Al's with them at Nha Trang.
Yeah, we're going to Nha Trang. We're going back to Nha Trang. Somebody was going around taking a lot of photographs there at Tan Son Nhut Airport while we were waiting for the planes to take us all back to Nha Trang.
Yeah, Al with the Rangers 68. I can't thank you
and
enough.
That's where they're having some of the guys were out there getting some senior officials were coming in and you give a couple decorations and just kind of inspect the guys and everything.
Wow. These are amazing photos.
Some of the times, we made a point of staying out of the way.
Absolutely. Let them do their own thing.
Let them do their own thing and leave us out of it. And that's me. And I don't know. I cannot remember the name of that guy. I never really worked with him. I was probably out there saying, "Trust me, I'm your friend. I've got a car you want to buy."
You got somebody taking a picture of y'all, and he's looking back and saying, "What in the world is going on?"
If you look at the bumper sticker on that truck, let's see what it says, if we can read it. CIDG CLD. See, that's the Command Liaison Detachment. Those are the guys that had a compound in Saigon and were supposed to support the guys coming through in and out. That guy there, this guy here, I don't know his name, but I don't think he was in Delta. I think he was one of the support guys.
Okay. 68, 69. So you're still able to rock your green beanie out in public and not worry about anything.
Yeah.
I know there was more than that. I've got all my sore pictures.
Right.
God almighty, I hate that.
No, I'm not really the best one to talk about SOG, though, because of my limited time there,
Yeah. Nonetheless, that was the end of that one. Can you take us into what happens when you end your run with the Rangers and you getting back home to Vietnam, to where you inevitably cross paths and end up in the unit, so to speak?
Well, I finished that tour with the Mike Force, and the only real We went a couple operations. We went up on a thing called Grand Summit there shortly before that, while we were on a stand down, and when they blew up the mountain. But then I went to the Mike Force and the Trang Mike Force, and I stayed with them. The only real mission I was involved with, we went down to Nui Koto in the 4 Corps, and I missed the parachute drop because of a goddamn clerk again. I got there just in time on a helicopter to land and help out the guys on the drop zone and evacuate some of their wounded and take them back up to Triton so they could get to the medics. And but we worked there, and I got to go out on the airboats. That was a first for me, and went out there and played bait for the guys up on Nui Koto. We took the airboats out on. It's a unique terrain down there because the mountain just comes right up out of the plains of reeds. It's water up until about just a few hundred meters from the base, and I got to go out with the 4 Corps guys on an airboat, and we're riding back and forth and looking at stuff and patrolling to see basically trying to interdict to see if anybody was doing any resupplies to the guy because this mountain was honeycombed. And later on, the Mike Force guys had to clean them out with flamethrowers. They actually went up with some flamethrowers to do that. But we're out there, and what I didn't know is we were also bait. And someone had taken a 106 recoilless rifle and moved it up there into a hidden area in some brush, like a little island of trees and stuff. And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden I see these splashes to my left, and oh, we're getting shot at. And then I saw some splashes to my right, and I realized that we've been bracketed. And just about that time, the American in the front got hit and went down. And what we were doing, but while we were doing this, the guy with the 106 saw where that gun was firing, and he blew him up with a 106. And they took out a couple of heavy machine guns that way, which is a pretty interesting way to do it. You know, we don't often use our own people for bait that way, but we can. And that was one time we did it, and it worked out. The guy up front didn't get killed. He got knocked out. It was really kind of interesting the way he got hit in the chin. I thought he was dead, but he just ended up getting knocked out. But that was about all over the Mike Force when I was in the Trang. I didn't get, I wasn't able to get on to one of the companies. They were pretty well manned. They had lots of people in the Trang Mike Force. So none of those companies were under strength as far as I knew. And I didn't really enjoy my time there because I just never got to be part of the part that I wanted to be. But I went home then, went to the infantry basic course, went through that. And I went to Fort Bragg to the 3rd Special Forces Group. And that was it was like going somewhere and marking time. So my buddy who went back to the PRU and I, we finagled our way around and got reassigned to Vietnam. And I went back over there as a 173rd, as a infantry lieutenant in the 2nd 503rd, and Jeff went to the PRUs again.
Oh wow! Okay, 173rd again. And is this will that be your last in quotation marks regular SF before you cross the border into the secret world?
Well, I won't say the secret world, but that was my last direct SF assignment in Asia. I spent a year with the 173rd as a rifle platoon leader, battalion assistant 3, battalion 2, and as a company commander. And then I extended for 6 months. I wanted to go to the Vietnamese Airborne Division, or one of their active regional ranger battalions, and I got sent to one of the conversion ranger battalions where I was battalion advisor till I rotated home. I went to the 10th Special Forces Group, spent a year and a half there, went to Thailand for a year with the Special Forces in Thailand, and then when I came home from that, I wasn't in Special Forces anymore. Wow. I went to the Training and Doctrine Command, and that's when I got exposed to the special mission world. And I saw a briefing at TRADOC headquarters that General Vaught, I think it was, and Colonel Beckwith gave to General Depew. I'm not sure now how I got invited to it, but I was glad I did. So then I volunteered for that organization. And was accepted. They'd already gotten going. I wasn't a plank owner, but I got in there fairly close afterwards.
Do you remember a roundabout year of when this is happening? I mean,
78.
fairly 78. Good
Yeah.
Lord. Okay, yeah, you're not a plank owner, but you're right there at
Well,
the.
I went to TRADOC, and I started out. I came back from Thailand, and they sent me to TRADOC, and I became the headquarters company commander for TRADOC, Training and Doctrine Command. And then later they combined that job with the post Fort Monroe headquarters company and the TRADOC company, and they dissolved the Women's Army Corps. And I inherited all the females too. So I had a total of over 1,100 people assigned to the company at that time. Then they moved me over to be in the research and development with TRADOC until I went to Bragg to try out to go to Delta.
Wow. Okay. What? And you know, I speaking with Mike Vining and some of the earlier guys, you know, they make it and especially now, but even then they had a whole area that were looking through records and all of that and looking for the best matches and all of that. Did you have anyone you knew from Vietnam that asked you or found you, or were you found through record searches and all that and asked?
It turns out later I knew some people there, but I didn't know it at the time. I mean, I knew Bucky Burris. I'm from the Trang Mike Force. I knew Logan Fitch from the 173rd. He was a D company commander when I was the intel officer. In fact, he doesn't remember it, but when he got wounded, I took the log bird out to get him because the dust off wouldn't go. And we brought him back in and got him to the hospital. And then see who else. Well, I knew other guys there, but again, I didn't know at the time that I knew they were there. So I was going in there cold on that, as far as that's concerned. And I'll tell you something else. It didn't make any difference who you knew before. You went in there, and I'll tell you that their whole process of coming in there and qualifying. Like I broke my ankle, so I was offered the job to stay and do something until I could heal up, and then I went back and went through their training, you know, qualification thing. And if I hadn't done it, I'd just say, well, thanks for coming, go away. You know, nobody had any animosity to people who quit or couldn't make it. They was just like, well, thank you, we appreciate your interest, and have a nice career, a nice life.
Wow. And I mean, literally, you know, you got Beckwith from Project Delta and a few other his guys. You got Country Grimes. You got Walt Shoemate. You got Dirty Dick Dally. I mean, it's on and on of the Mel Wick. I mean, just I knew
Shoemate from the 11th Airborne Division when he was an E4. He'd been an E7 reduced to E4, and I was a PFC E3 working on a detail. And they were putting the German paratroopers through their cadre through their jump school there at Gabligan. So I first ran into him, and we crossed paths a dozen times after that.
How folks always ask me, and I try and help them when I hear about or talk to guys that knew Walt. But what was Walt like? You know, we hear all these legendary stories.
Walt, I tell you what, I think Walt was. His intelligence was often underestimated because he was smart, and he was a total professional. And we used to laugh about it. You know, Walt probably did things that other guys would have gotten decorations for, but for Walt, they thought that was just business as usual, if that makes sense. He had the experience. He had the ability. He volunteered. He used to piss me off because he could run smoking a cigarette faster than I could run in good shape, you know. And he would be a de facto leader of many things without having the headlines to go with it. You know, they didn't name that dive tower down at Key West for him for nothing. There he is right there on the right. And that mustache, even when the Army, he was in units that didn't want mustaches, he had a mustache.
That mustache is actually, from what I've heard from Cliff and current unit members, that is still in a shadow box on the wall at the unit.
Well, I don't know where it is right now, but I know the meeting where we dealt with it. It was at McKellar's Lodge, and General Garrison was there, and Mel Wick, myself, and a couple others. and the commander at the time wasn't going to let them do it. So they were trying to figure out how to get it in there. And I remember I said, well, shit, give it to General Garrison. They're not going to stop him from carrying it in. Go inside, pass it on to the right guy there, and we'll do something. And everybody said, yeah, good idea. So that's what they did and that's my story, and I'm sticking with it because I know I raised the issue. But
Absolutely.
That's what happened. And I never saw it personally. I know they said at one time, well, they put it in a piece of lucite, and at one time it was supposedly on a pedestal somewhere in a little garden area. Mm-hmm. But I would like to think that it's inside the main part. And in fact, Walt's ashes were scattered in a free fall on range 19.
With Mr. Cliff dropped in.
I got there too late that day to be there. And in fact, I was outside the compound on the road outside of it. I forget what that road is now. McKellar's Lodge intersects it. And anyway, and their CID guy come by and said, hey, what are you doing here? What are you doing? I says, yeah, don't worry about it. I used to be in the unit, Okay. But I missed that one. I wished I hadn't.
Oh man, he sounds like a heck of a guy. That the man on the far left, our far left, that's Paul Schoenberg. He's in the group that you're in with us, and he's a heck of a guy. And Walt and Paul Shepard, who is right here, it's a Hatchet Force operation. Both of them took Paul under their wing. He calls Walt Walt called him Young Grasshopper.
Well, Walt was the kind of guy that would be a mentor without really making it you understanding it. I mean, he had a good way of doing things, but he also had this great imagination and a lot of audacity. He could just pull something, rabbit out of the hat, and do something, and people would just say, "How the hell did he figure that out, or why did he do that?" And so it got to be where everybody in the unit at one time would go around TDY and they would register as Walt Shoemate.
I love those funny stories of people not paying for night out on towns in Bangkok and all that, and it being Walt Shoemate was here and all that. Just a legend in himself.
And then you get back to the unit, and like I didn't know Grimes before, but he started all this recon stuff with the LERP company in Germany. Well, what most of them don't know is that I got pulled because I was good with a prick 10. I was pulled in the winter of 59 to go on an exercise to validate the concept. They took a group of, I think it was five or six of us, and I went along just to carry the prick 10. And we were inserted by helicopter, and we moved into the wooded areas and moved only at night and went everything cross country with no communications except to report what we saw. And came back in, and they said, yes, this validated the possibility of using LERPs in Europe. And later than that, they created the 7th, I think it was the 7th Corps or the 5th Corps LERP company. And that's where all this LERP in Europe came from. But it started in the 24th Division, 1st Battle Group, 34th Infantry. But we're not in the history book. But we H-34 helicopters were used to insert us. And we sat up there in the woods and stayed back and reported troop movements and locations and stuff like that. And of course, with the rudimentary gear we had at the time, as far as when you talk about today what we've got, but all of the patrol leader was a combat veteran, and the other guys were senior NCOs or NCOs, and I was the only private out there, and I was a private because I'd gotten busted.
I remember those stories. I mean, like you said, it all started in Germany. Hell, Jerry Shriver, that's where he got his start.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. We've got, like you said, we've got some good questions, but before we end, and one question ties into what you're doing now, but is there anything else with the unit that you would care to mention or speak about? I know you can't speak much about that.
Well, I'm not going to talk about much personalities and things other than to say that what started out then has ballooned into size and capability. And one of the things that just drives me absolutely crazy is this incessant need by these assholes in DC to tell our enemies how we're doing things. And all that does is arm our enemies and put us in greater peril. The talks about like how we've developed our tactical intelligence, our signals intelligence capabilities to a great degree. And then they go out there and say, "Oh, we found them because we found
Use
their
this and
cell
that.
phones. We did this and we did that. Aren't we so cool?" Yeah, you're cool, all right, but you're a bunch of goddamn assholes who
And
don't
you're getting
have any
men on the ground
consideration
killed.
for the men on the ground and the women on the ground too, because the women are out there too, and they're in harm's way. And these son of a bitches are too busy feeding their fucking egos. Excuse me, I do have a feeling about that.
The platform is yours, sir.
Well, you know, in DC, when I worked in DOD, I found that across the board, you had all kinds of smart people who had great egos and great aspirations, and they had good intelligence, but their experience was about a millimeter deep. And they did not give a big rat's ass about the people it's going to affect as long as it made their careers for them.
And I hate to say it, just like, I'm not a big fan of the Navy SEALs and everything, but what really, really on a main scale started it when Obama came out and bragged about killing Osama, and specifically saying it was SEAL Team 6. And you don't hear Delta doing stuff like that, writing books. There's been books about it, but
we got big mouths in all the organizations. But the thing that got me there was not so much just the fact that he identified the specific unit was stupid. But then they started talking about the special capabilities of the helicopter, which is even stupider because nobody needed to know that. You don't need to broadcast these things. And
we sure as hell don't need to know it.
And reporters say, "Oh, the people need to know." The people don't need to know. The people who understand things don't want to know.
But as long as y'all are able to protect us, we don't need to know what in the hell y'all's capabilities are.
I know techniques and capabilities that have not been used yet. And I worked with some people doing movies and doing screenplays and stuff. And I'm not going to volunteer anything tactically to them that's not right on YouTube every day. Because who knows when it might be employed, or who knows who might take what I think or what I know and use it
against us
and have it foiled because the other guys are ready for it.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree, and I'm glad to hear you say that because
if you looked at those pictures, you don't see a lot of me pictures. These are pictures other people took.
Those are the only two, and as a matter of fact, I literally just found the only other photo I've ever seen of you in your military career except your retirement, and I never knew this was you. You can actually clarify if this is you or not, but look at this. Oh shit.
That's Charlie.
Moe Elmore wearing a camouflage hat.
Oh, that's when we were loading the one. Yeah, that and Bucky put that out.
Okay.
I pissed him off when I told him I didn't appreciate my name in there. But yeah, I was working in support. That's one of my greatest disappointments is I wasn't capable hadn't qualified yet to be riding on the plane when it left.
So that is in fact you then?
That's me. Yeah.
Boy, Bucky. Wow.
That's Bucky.
Bucky and
I'm trying to think of his name now. He's a sharp kid. Quiet.
Steve, is it Steve? No, it's not Steve Hoffman.
No, Hoffman's Hoffman was much more of a solid,
big, thick man.
Yeah. He was thick built.
Shit, Mike Vining told me who the hell it was.
And that's over on the left there.
There's Phil Hansen right there. Yep, Phil Hansen.
The guy on the left there, the guy on the left of Bucky, that looks like Dick Potter, who retired as a general.
It is Dick Potter to the left.
That's another.
Fred Lewis. Fred Lewis.
Yeah, Fred Lewis. That's it. Fred Lewis. And and Potter is also another excellent officer, a real leader, and he was probably the reason that Beckwith didn't get in real trouble.
That's exactly what Mike Vining said. Mike Vining said had Potter not been around, and to an extent, Bucky Burris would have burned way too many bridges, and probably it wouldn't have turned out the way Delta turned out because.
In my opinion, Beckwith was never going to be a crook.
No.
Marcinko turned out to be a crook,
a huge crook.
But at the same time, I don't want to. You say you're not a huge fan of the SEALs. Well, I'm not a huge fan of their.
I respect the hell out of them.
Their want for publicity, but I've known enough of the really capable
real SEALs
guys that I think a lot of them overall. I just think that unfortunately there's a lot of SEALs who could, and I say this about the Marine Special Operations guys in the past, they confuse enthusiasm with capability.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when we trained the HRT, the FBI, during their first culmination exercise. I was out there with them, and I remember John Simeone turned to me and he says, "Damn, Mo, there's a lot more to this shit than we thought there was."
You're damn right, man.
Those were his words. And he and Danny Colson was the commander, and John Simeone was the number 2 guy for the HRT when they formed. And he said that to me. He said, "Man, shit, Mo, there's a lot more to this shit than we thought there was," because we expanded the SWAT mentality to the combined capabilities and the intelligence capability and the communication and a lot of other things that they had not ever been forced to deal with.
Yeah, that's another thing people don't understand is, and guys, we're going to hit the questions. I'm sorry. I've been chewing the fat with Mo like we're talking on the phone alone. That people don't realize it's not just door kickers in every aspect with the SEALs or Delta. No doubt y'all are kicking in doors, shooting people in the faces and all that, but y'all have got recce, y'all have got snipers, y'all have got intel in-house. I mean, y'all are, I mean, it's not just kicking doors and being action heroes. I mean, y'all are the full total package, so to speak. So,
well, my last assignment in the Army was the deputy commander of the 5th Special Forces Group under Colonel Beauray, and then later Colonel John Noe, both of whom I knew from before. I knew Beauray at JSOC, and I knew Noe in the unit, and they're both people I thought a lot of, and they were very capable and everything like that. And my last deployment where I went where hostile people were running around shooting folks was in Somalia. And by the chance of the Air Force's airplane breaking down, I wasn't back in country for the Black Hawk Down period. I was supposed to have been back in country, and I got delayed a week. So I got there, I think, 2 days afterwards. We stopped at Bragg and picked up some replacements and some other guys and got into country after the fact. In fact, that's where Scott Miller, I knew Scott Miller. He grew up with my kid. He played soccer with my oldest, and I knew his dad pretty well. We were friends, social friends. Yeah.
That again, guys, Scotty Miller. It was the last commander of Delta. Wow. I mean, your kids growing up with the future head of Delta. I mean,
well, he ended up the senior guy in Afghanistan when they're closing out too. And I exchange a chat with him once in a while on Facebook. And Scotty was a quality guy then. And I remember seeing him when I saw him in Mogadishu. I came by there, and he had frag wounds. Like he said, the grenades, if the Italian grenades had gone off, we'd all be dead. But he had, he and Whitaker was his sergeant major were there. And so I saw Nick Nichols there, and I think Mel was. I don't know if Mel was there or not. And
Somalia, he wasn't on the ground. He was there though.
Yeah. Anyway, it was I
mean, that is just so. And like y'all told me from the very beginning, and people are finally starting to realize. Yes, Jason, Ken Beauray, RT Idaho, Ken Beauray. Yes.
He was at CCN. Beauray.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, sir. And he went on a long way. He was Sidewinder, RT Idaho, and then he stayed and even fought the Khmer Rouge for quite a while. He went
down there with Fank.
Yeah. Fank is another interesting. I'm trying to get some Fank men on to talk. But since we've covered a good bit of what we can speak about with the unit and its members and you, before we get to questions, as far as operationally and what we've covered before questions, would you like to add anything else to that before we get into the questions?
No, I don't think so. I just, I could sit around and tell war stories and lies probably for forever, but we don't need to get in. I just go ahead and ask some questions. Maybe that'll lead to something too.
It will. It absolutely will. And we'll definitely actually love to have you back to get on here and tell some lies and war stories. Alex, when time permits and is appropriate, could you ask him the difference in a mission set Omega took on versus, well, Omega was basically SOG, but versus SOG versus a Project Delta, if there was any main difference in mission sets?
Okay. Initially, you had Project Delta, which was the forerunner of all the reconnaissance units. And their mission was in country, and they set the gold standard to begin with. And that's Recondo School stemmed from the techniques and capabilities that Project Delta had formed. Omega and another one called Sigma, which was down in 3 Corps, were primarily recon units with a regional interest. Sigma was the 3 Corps area, the West. They had the Iron Triangle, Michelin Plantation area regions, and then Omega was 2 Corps, and they ran out primarily within 2 Corps area, the geographic area. But each of those had their own reconnaissance elements, their own reaction forces, and their own security forces. It just depended on who was in charge. And in Delta, you had a case of true advisors in some parts of it, and like partnerships on the others. So it's hard to really put them in any other category. Omega and Sigma, the Americans ran them. We ran our own patrols. We ran all our Aussies or other Westerners that were within the organizations. They ran the various components. So I don't think we had any, other than translators, I don't think we had any Vietnamese in Project Omega that I could ever remember. They just had, if they had any presence there, I never ran across it. I think Sigma was very much the same, but Sigma had mostly, I think theirs were Vietnamese and Cambodians and stuff, and Omega was almost all Montagnards. Delta had a combination of a little bit of all of them. I remember when I was with the Rangers there at a stand down, we came back in to get some replacements, and I was going down to this little bar, and I went in and bought a round of beer for some of the Rangers because I had money and they didn't. And I noticed one of the Rangers had a Montagnard bracelet. So I walked over to him and I says, "I plus Rade." And he looked at me and he started crying because he hadn't heard anybody speak Rade in years, because he was the only Montagnard in that company. But because the Delta Rangers were primarily Vietnamese. In fact, the company commander of the 5th Company, Dai Huy Bic, had come down from the north. He was one of the Vietnamese had come down from the north after the separation of the country, and he'd been fighting for 20 goddamn years. So what am I going to teach him about fighting, So I was we were primarily fire support coordinators for these guys.
Wow.
I don't know if I answered the question.
It did. And Sigma, just to add on, Sigma was the group that the Green Beret affair tied around. If y'all
no, that was
correct.
Gamma.
It was Gamma. I'm sorry.
You mean talk about the guy who was assassinated and thrown?
Yes, sir.
That was Gamma. That was
Gamma.
Gamma was an intelligence organization. It was not a operational tactical organization. It was intelligence, which is still tactical, but not in the sense of going out and looking for trouble. Now it's funny, out of the SOD, the ASA SOD in Okinawa, you had at least 6 or 7 of us that ended up in the projects. Roger Smith, me, Schultz, Lewis, Ken Woodward, and I think there's some others too, but I can't think of them offhand. That's out of a small unit that all ended up going straight special forces and working in special projects.
Wow. Roger Smith, that name sounds
he was
familiar.
in SOG. He lives in Las Vegas.
Oh gosh, Roger Smith. Yes, he ran RT Hawaii and RT one of the Midwestern team names. Great man. He was Mike Force also.
Yeah. I think he was 3 Corps Mike Force.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Got some great photos of him. Sorry guys, we've got a good bottom blast full. Is it true NVA camps were usually near water sources and valleys, which is part of the reason streams became so dangerous when looking for water?
Well, they would not necessarily. Well, camps, NVA normally were in groups of unit size, and often they'd be set up on terrain that was good for their defense. In fact, if you ran up against a very good NVA unit, they would have done their perimeter by the book. But there would always be access to water. Now, how close it would be, that would be, they have, they're like any other military. They'll send a detail of guys to carry water, or they will grab up local people and force them to carry water. But water sources are dangerous for a number of reasons. One of which is you're channelized. Depending on the size of the water source, that could be an obstacle if you get hit and you can't break contact and get away. So you've got to either fight your way out or try to flank them. So, but yeah, you almost always considered water sources to be a potential danger area.
And how much water did you say you guys would actually actively carry?
Well, water is a heavy thing.
Heavy.
And it's bulky. So, I usually wanted to go heavy on water because I can go without food for days, but I need water, especially the way I'm a guy that sweats like a faucet. I drain quick. And we talked about salt before. When I went in the Army, we got issued salt tablets, and my dad taught me to use salt as a preventative before I'd go out and start working in the sweat, in the fields and stuff. So,
it would stop you from being dehydrated. The salt, that was
no, it doesn't do that. What it does is, see, when you sweat, you lose your electrolytes, you lose the trace minerals your body needs to keep working. So the salts and other stuff, Gatorade and all that is, but magnesium, phosphorus, sodium, et cetera, are all part of that electrolyte balance that you have to have for your body to function properly. And when you lose that, if you ever worked out, like for an example in New Mexico, you work out in the sun and you sweat, but you don't feel it because it dries so fast. But when you take a break and you rub your forehead, it comes away gritty. That's all the salts that have come out of your body, and it's been laying on the surface of your skin. And you got to replace that, or else your muscles don't work. You get cramped. You lose focus. It's almost like another side of hypothermia. Because when that happens, your functions start to dissolve. Same thing with the heat. It does a similar thing. Your organs don't perform well because they are being drained and they become dried out. Kidneys down. Your kidneys start to shut down on you, and your blood gets thicker. It gets sluggish. So you really are hurting yourself if you don't maintain that balance. I went to jump school. They force fed us salt tablets all the time, and by the time I got to the 173rd, the official thing was that you get enough salt out of your C rations to carry you through whatever weather. Well, first of all, when you're being issued, you're carrying all that goddamn weight, and nobody's going to carry every meal of the C rations. They're going to discard the stuff that they don't like, or that is just too heavy, or they'll eat it and then they throw it away. You don't get it. So when I had a company or a platoon, I forced my guys to take extra salt. I never had a heat casualty. Never. Wow. Not every unit had that same thing happen. When the Marines came into I-Corps, I was up there, and my buddy Gary Callan was a guide. It was an introduction guide to one of the rifle companies, Marine rifle companies. And the company commander insisted they blouse their boots and tuck in their shirts because they were wearing the old dungaree shirt and pants. And they carried one canteen. And Gary said, I told this captain, I said, sir, you're going to have more than one canteen. No, we've been to Okinawa. We know what we're doing. A disciplined Marine only needs one canteen of water a day. They hadn't gone 2 kilometers, and they had about 8 guys pass out from the heat. Not pass out, but they were combat ineffective. So, some people have to be taught the hard way.
Jeez Louise. Thank you for explaining that.
I carried water. We didn't have the bigger canteens at the time I was there, and I didn't like them too much because they are too bulky. But
a lot of water weight.
I always carried spare canteens, and I would put them in the side pockets of my rucksack. And that way, when you emptied them out, your canteens, you could drink it down, and you could refill it when you cross streams. But in the Central Highlands and across the border in the tri-border area, coming across water was not always that difficult. But in certain areas,
down south,
the streams were intermittent, or the water was so bad you couldn't consume it even with pills. And so water was a critical item. And then again, just drinking water without the electrolytes, all you do is you flood your stomach and give you a full belly, but your body doesn't recover as well.
Oh, that makes me think if they ever tried thinking of a Gatorade type deal in Vietnam. James like to know, Darrell, any mission the CIA ever wanted y'all to run?
Well, that at the time I was with SOG, they were the ones who were primarily our mission taskers. They were the ones who gave us the mission areas they wanted covered and all that. Now, they didn't select the specific LZs and things. We did that ourselves, but the missions were CIA oriented most of the time that I remember.
Oh yes, oh yes. I mean, heck, you know, the CIA have officially stopped in '65 when they actually started running, and we lost Larry, or y'all lost Larry Thorne. But you could still see the CIA fingertips in it, considering William Colby was the deputy to Chief SOG from '68 to '71. So,
well, there was, you know, across the border into Laos, I think there was some people that were detailed. You never know who was detailed where, and often, well, I mean, I've run across guys around the world in the last, you know, in the ensuing years, and I know I've met one place in Latin America that when he saw me, he almost went white and looked away. So it let me know that I'm not supposed to know him.
Oh, okay.
Things like that. And in country, there were times when we might have been given something special. And when like the projects that I was working that I can't talk about now, or some of the organizations I worked with, I'll just say that there were other people involved and there were other people dictating missions and focus, but that's it.
That's all you need to say right there.
Yeah.
Alec, whoa, sorry. He came back. He was leaving. He had to check in at work.
Yeah, he's adios.
Yeah, he came back though. They give him credit. He did come back at work. Group DCO early. He's talking about someone else. Did anyone ask where he got the name?
That's kind of a thing where I was Elmore became Elmo, and then it was Sergeant Elmo, and then it was Sergeant Moe. And I've got a cousin who was in the Army and retired, and he was Emo. That's what his name turned out to be, Sergeant Emo. So it just evolved around that.
And the next person actually said right after that, Elmo. That's great. I like Moe. I like Moe's.
Yeah, I'm one of the Three Stooges.
There you go. My favorite three group of men, comedic wise. Here we go. The Phoenix program, yes, it was hated by the Vietnamese because they worked so hard against them. Still very smart and articulate. I had staff duty at group. He would talk with me and give little nuggets. He was also in Army of Northern Virginia.
No, I was not. I was interviewed and I was almost a deputy, but the military intelligence community did not want another operator in there. They wanted an intel officer.
Okay. Well, Michael,
but I was the commander at the time was Tom O'Connell, who's now passed on. Okay. And I knew a fair number of those guys, and I worked with some of their people in other places. I thought pretty highly of them.
Well, Michael, I'm glad you joined us today. I hope you'll like and subscribe because we're always getting folks back and new SOG men to join us. So, Jason, we'll save that to the end. I think we've got a few more actual questions. Jason, I'll get that to close out. Greetings from Scotland. Did your guest use any of those mini grenades? And if so, what did he think of using them?
Only a few times I did, because when I was there, we were getting them, but it seemed like the guys in Prairie Fire bogarted them all. But what I loved them for a couple of reasons. One, you could carry a shitload of them, and you could throw them a long way. And I don't think they were as effective as the bigger ones, but they were plenty effective. And the fact is, what you're using them for, they give you everything you wanted, as far as I could tell.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. And when people say mini grenades, I really didn't understand until Dan Sturr.
They're about like this.
Oh yeah, I mean,
they're like not much more than a ping pong ball in diameter.
And he was telling the story about the Montagnards getting a few and trying to throw them, and them not having the arm strength alone to throw the other ones. And it just
Well, when I was in the Mike Force, I had to teach guys to throw grenades, and we took them out. We didn't have training grenades; we had to use live grenades.
oof.
And so I took them out to this place, and we went through the training and all this stuff, and we didn't pull the pins. We let them throw, and the yards don't throw things growing up.
No,
They don't have, their bodies are not attuned to throwing things. They don't grow up and develop the hand-eye coordination to throw, heavier things. So I got out there and they pulled a pin and they throw them, and I had this big mound of dirt, and I'd grab them and lay down behind it when they didn't go very far. And my said, oh, before I forget, the guys up in CCN had mostly Brew mountain yards, which is an entirely different trail. But anyway, the Sedang I had, Ser, that was his whole name, Ser, S-E-R. That guy couldn't throw anything anywhere, and he literally pulled a pin and threw it right at his feet. And I had to pick him up and literally pick him up, and we dove behind this mountain of dirt before the grenade went off. So it finally dawned on me, you know what? In World War II, all the Americans did not know how to throw baseballs. So in World War II and World War I, we lobbed grenades. You took it and you just sailed it over your head. So I got and made a bunch of dirt clods into mud balls and taught these guys to lob mud balls. Wow. And once they had thrown the mud balls, then they took the grenades and they would throw a grenade that way and it would go somewhere. Wow. But I tell you what, that was a scary day when trying to teach those guys to throw hand grenades.
I've heard some horror stories, and that's that's perfect. Like you said, I mean, you can tell in Asia, Europe, Ireland, when they're throwing Molotov cocktails, you can tell who's not, playing baseball growing up very easily. Right. And like you said, that just like that, that's no better way, because it's
right.
hard.
Most of the hoodlums in Europe kick soccer balls. They don't throw cricket balls or baseballs.
I was about to say, you can tell they're raised on a soccer nation there. Jason would like to know about. Would you explain why the M16?
I had the lower M16 and a carbine upper. And the reason I did that was, number one, I liked the balance better. I liked the way it felt when I was bringing it up to fire it. The other reason was I think it had a slightly slower cyclic rate. And I never was one wanting to burn up a lot of bullets that I didn't have to. If I wanted to shoot a 2-round burst, I wanted to be able to control a 2-round burst. So it's just like in Mogadishu, the first time I shot at some guy, I shot single shots, and then I realized I needed to go. So I flipped it on over to automatic. Once you get over the adrenaline stuff, you start to be able to respond with more judgment. And I had come with what my experience had taught me that I liked the shorter upper also for patrolling, because you're going through the brush, you bring it back into your body, and you got nothing out there to snag. With a full length M16, it's a little bit harder. Of course, you can do it, but it's still not as easy. But I liked the balance, the feel, and the slower rate of fire of the combination I used.
Yeah, I was so glad to learn about that from that picture and learn about it. Baltimore Bob, what does Moe think of the new 3-point slings of today?
Well, I've used a couple of them, and I think they're really nice. I really like to be able to get rid of a weapon if I need to too. And once it's hanging on you, if it's gone out of action and you're hanging on to you, that's going to limit your ability to move and get through stuff, And it's just like when we were doing aircraft takedown training, some of my guys says, I'm not going to wear body armor. Okay, why? Because it slows me down. I'm going to depend on speed and surprise and accuracy of fire to eliminate the threat. Whereas the body armor is going to cause me to move slower and I can't get around things. It takes away my flexibility. To me, the 3-point slings have a lot of benefits to them, but personally, I don't think I'd really want them. That's just me, and I don't have the extensive experience with it to make probably the best judgment.
Well, I mean, you've got significant combat experience with your sling that you had.
If you have a stoppage and you're just going to go to immediate change to your secondary weapon, it's fine to have
Perfect.
it there. But if it's really out of whack, if it's really not something you can clear, because the whole AR family, if you have a damage, something inside that chamber or inside the receiver like that, you got to take it apart to clear or clean it up a lot of times. And if it's dislocated the bolt part way and it's jammed up, you can't get it apart. You're gonna have to take it to the arms room, and that's further than I can walk.
Yeah, if we make it back to the arms room area.
It's a matter of preference.
I'd love to hear any stories about Moe's insects, snakes, and other animal encounters.
Well, I will talk about one time we were going along on the near side of a ridge line. We could hear noises and activity down the other side. And of course, when in a patrol, I had a point man, and then I would be number 2. And we're going along, and we're going around this big tree. And I went to put my hand down to brace myself. And when I did, there's a little green bamboo viper looking at me, trying to say hello there. And I unconsciously stiffened up and lit back, and I rolled back. And the next thing I know, I'm rolling backwards down the hill, trying to stop myself so I don't make any noise, because all I could think of was, oh shit, they're going to hear us, and we're going to be and this is not a good place where we are right now. And as it turned out they didn't. But I did do that. I have seen a few snakes, but I didn't have that many while I was on active duty. Most of my snake problems were as a civilian.
And y'all definitely came across some wildlife out there. Baz would like to know, what was crossover like going from jungle to urban warfare? P.S. Huge respect for the Delta men. I've worked with them on multiple occasions and had very close training relationships over the years.
Well, the biggest thing I would say is that, of course, jungle I'm talking about here is with, triple canopy. And when you're near the edge of the jungle, it's much thicker than it is internally, et cetera. And you're operating more, you have more options for movement. You can maneuver. You can do reconnaissance. You can camouflage yourself and lie doggo, or you can set up things. And when you get into the urban warfare, everything is channelized. You don't go sneaking around very much because you're going to be seen. So you've got to have all these other things to deal with. And of course, jungle warfare and urban warfare in real terms, urban warfare, you're normally going to end up at closer range than you are in jungle, but not much. If you get into fighting, like I guess like in Afghanistan, where you get contacts at extended ranges, that's a different one too. That's an intermediate type thing. To me, urban warfare is more challenging and more difficult. You've got secondary missiles whenever you're firing and stuff. You may have to expose yourself to do anything. If you're going to get in a room clearing, that's a whole different training environment. If you're going to do jungle warfare, is a different training environment. In jungle warfare, you've got fire and movement, fire and maneuver. You've got ambushes and things like that. You've got quick responses, meeting contacts and all these other things that go into it. Whereas in the urban environment, you have some of those that seem the same, but the actual activity is differently. And the urban environment dictates more, I think, to what you're able to do. I prefer to fight in the jungle. I don't, in the urban. One thing about urban combat, you see your enemy more often. In the jungle, a lot of times, all you're doing is shooting at flashes and smoke and dust. And you shoot where you think they might be or what they were. In the urban, you're more likely to see something that actually you can trigger on, you can key on. But
they can key back on you as well, though.
Yeah, right. Well, the urban environment will limit the availability of shooting some weaponry. Your 40 millimeters have to go so far before they're armed. And in an urban, you may not be able to shoot the next building over. You may be too close. Use of grenades, it's very likely a grenade's going to bounce back if you don't get it through the window or something like that. It's a whole different set of techniques and tactics that you have to apply. And each one of them has its own unique characteristics. That's about all I could say. If he has anything specifically, I'd be happy to answer what I think about that.
I think that's pretty much it. We'll see if it comes back up, but I think that's it. Hell, now we're getting into, trench warfare. That's making a run back at things.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Hell, in Mogadishu, we did some support units over there that they didn't have any experience. They were, most of our support units, they pay lip service to field fortifications and things. And they built trenches with revetments, but they were going to flood, and they were breaking down because they knew what they were trying to do. They didn't know how to do it. And I was able to go over there with my field engineer handbook from the SF engineer side of the world and my own experience from what I'd been trained. See, I inherited training from guys who served in World War II and Korea, and from my dad, who was pre-World War II. So these guys taught us and made us do things that weren't being taught anymore. And so I got with these guys from the transportation unit out of Fort Campbell, and I went out there with the NCOs, and we did some training and practice and everything else. And they said, "Aha, this is how it works." Yeah. So they reinforced and redid all their trench system there, and it worked good for them then. But until somebody shows them and knows what they're talking about, it's sometimes hard for them to actually implement a technique or build something or following the procedures they should.
Yeah, wow. We had Mr. Bill Walter, the AC-130 crewman that interviewed you and was talking about you being the SF liaison and them having to identify bunkers and stuff like that, and that was an amazing amazing.
Well, those guys are great, and they're different. Monitors and sensors have been improved over time. I mean, I got to fly with them over El Salvador, and you sit there and watch a boat going across the lake because you can see the motor, with the FLIR, and you could tell when it's running and when it's shut down because of the heat signature and stuff. And when we were in Mogadishu, those guys were incredibly good with what they could do. Unfortunately, the Air Force decided they didn't want to send more crews and aircraft. And so we were stuck with one mission a day. We couldn't rotate missions or have on-call aircraft. It wasn't available, and as a result, there was no aircraft overhead when we wanted them sometimes.
Yeah, those books, the ROEs and stuff in that really let you down, and that was
but ROE are run by politicians. And that's
Clinton
part of
was
it.
a nightmare.
And the other part is that one of the hardest things in the world to me is trying to maintain any sense of humanity in war. I mean, you got to consciously think about it to do it because it's so easy to slip the other way.
Wow. Baz would like to know, did you know a General Bennett Sakalit?
I think I may have met him. I don't really know him. I've heard good things about him. That's all I could tell you about him. He's done some writing about a few articles that I thought pretty well of too.
Okay. Wow. The last thing to tie in with what you're doing now. Jason would like to hear about the Horses for Heroes program.
Okay, Rick Iannucci was an SF at one time, and then he retired from the DEA. He's got the Crossed Arrows Ranch, which is, I think it's on Highway 14 south of Santa Fe. And what they started and what they have now developed to where it's a real ongoing concern is a place where they can take folks, men and women, who are having trouble adjusting to returning to normal life. They take them out there and they teach them to deal with livestock and horses, to ride horses and use them and develop a whole set of cowboy ranching skills. And while they're doing that, they have a bunkhouse where they've got, quarters and a kitchen and all that stuff. And so it's a resident type program. And they've also got it set up where some of these people, as they get completed, if they want to, they can go on and there's jobs for them available, or they try to find them jobs on various ranches and farms around and let them, just it's to help them develop trust using, the livestock as a non-judgmental thing. And Rick had a heart attack, so he's not as active physically as he was, but his significant other, I don't know if they're married or not, but he's got a girlfriend who is really top notch onto this too. In fact, I owe him a visit. I need to go back out to New Mexico and stop by and drink some of his coffee sometime. But I think it's really an ongoing program, and I still donate a few bucks to him every year just to make sure they keep the lights on.
Here's a little tidbit on you. Darrell Moe Elmore, a retired U.S. Army Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel, has provided advisory assistance to Iannucci's program. Cowboy life requires an individual to work with others, but also be independent to make logical decisions, to accept that life is not necessarily fair, and that individual acts have rewards and responsibilities, Elmore said. Horses are not judgmental, and while they can be demanding, they are also loyal and respond to proper care. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty true, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's I tell you, I was in a bad way for a while after losing my dad, and without rescuing animals that were in much worse case than me, finding them starving and all that, and nursing and getting close with animals, that really got me through a tough time in my life. So
well, I made an observation some years ago when my wife and I were traveling, and it was this, that you can learn a lot about a society by how they treat stray animals.
Absolutely.
And one of the things, the place that got me the most was Chile. We went up into the mountains there in Chile, and and then again another town that was down on the coast. It was notable because they had all these houses built on stilts, at the harbor. But the common thing was you see stray dogs, and the dogs were well fed, and they looked healthy, and nobody threw rocks at them or yelled at them or kicked them out of the way. We went to this one little town up in the mountains there, like I said, and here's a park, and here's the the statue of the guy on horseback with his hat in the air and a sword in his hand. And here's this dog laying there asleep at the bottom, and people walking around him and all the rest, and nobody's perturbed. And I'm thinking, to me, that there's a certain aspect of that society that can handle and allow these. Now, I have no doubt in my mind that somehow there may be a program to give them rabies shots. There may be something going on, but none of the dogs were aggressive or defensive. None of the dogs looked injured or being abused. And to me, that was a good thing. And I've been in other countries where rocks are thrown at them and they're kicked and squirreled, and there's no empathy at all for the livestock. They're strictly just a tool. They treat them worse than they would a good set of wrenches. And again, it
tells you a lot. Look at Mexico. That Mexico treats their dogs, and you see what the society of Mexico is turning into right now.
And it's not the same in every city.
No, not at all.
Some of the towns are different, and again, that's what I'm saying. That you, in fact, of course, now in Panama, we were doing I was on a relay race across the Panama when I was at the School of the Americas there, going to Command and General Staff School. And my group, we went through, we're doing good, but I heard some commotion behind me. A dog ran out and bit one of the runners at the end, and the dog was rabid.
Oh,
that poor sucker had to go through a whole series of rabies shots and all the rest, but if you don't, rabid dogs can be very aggressive. That's the other thing. The dog probably wouldn't have done anything if it hadn't been infected, but
no, not at all. I mean, I've seen some rabid coyotes, dogs, and those are not the things you want to mess around with.
Nope, not a bit.
Chad, please come back soon. We want Moe. We want Moe. We want Moe.
Well, I don't know if I got much more to give you, but I hope I haven't told any lies, or if I have, they were intentional.
I'm hoping we can tie up. I'm trying to get guys together now with pilots that they knew, or men that they knew that they haven't reconnected with, and get them together. So if I can hook you up with any of your old contacts or anybody that you know from your Omega days, we'd love to have you back on to hear y'all two reminisce.
Well, it's unfortunate that I don't have never had a good memory for names. And so there are air crew, for example, that I know the guy. If I saw the guy again, I'd probably know him from across the room, but I can't think of his name to save my ass. But there was one pilot got me on strings one time, who flew he did with his helicopter what you can't do. You know, and there's other pilots that when you've got a pilot sitting there at a hover in an LZ, taking fire and talking on the radio like he's sitting here talking between you and me, you got to shake your head and say, damn, listen to that guy. Look at that guy. You know, that guy's he's just hard as Superman's kneecaps. You can't perturb him. You can't bother him, but he's probably scared. And I'm still in touch with a pilot that I flew with when I was in the 173rd. And he still remembers that one mission, and I still remember this mission in detail because it was different, unique, and we. It's funny. I remember, you get a lot of firefights, but you only remember some of them. You only really get the details in some of them, and some of these that they stay in your mind forever.
Is there since we finally got the last of our questions? First off, I want to thank you for spending 3 hours with us today. Is there anything else you'd like to close with or say before we end for the afternoon?
No, I really appreciated the chance to talk. I guess I just most of the time I'm sitting around here watching TV, reading a book, or doing something, and I don't talk to people all the time. When I do, I start to prattle and chatter. I hope I was able to inform people with something worth knowing, and if people do have any specific questions, you can forward them to me later, and I'll try to answer them.
I will, guys.
I could speak to race relations to some extent someday.
Well, I'm telling you, we definitely gonna want to have you back on. And he's saying, genuine photogenic fucker to another. Moe is a rock star legend from Chad. Yes, we're definitely gonna.
People give me more credit than I'm due in a lot of cases, but
well, all of like I tell all of you men from Vietnam, and especially the Recon men, y'all deserve. Y'all are finally starting to get the recognition y'all deserve. That's my life goal, is to make sure y'all's memory lives on.
I don't know if you know this, but you know who Paris Davis is?
I do. Yes,
yeah,
sir.
Well, he was a captain in Okinawa when I was there, and I didn't know him well. I met him a few times, and he's one of the team leaders that had a good reputation with the guys I knew. And that's one of the things that I used to use as my gauge on your value. If you went to the club and the guys who wanted you to have a drink with them, if they were the guys you admired, then maybe you were one of the right crew. And Davis was one of the right crew type. And right now he's trying to get a program going to get a congressional gold medal for the SOG veterans.
I just saw that, and I hope that works out. And another thing about Paris Davis, without him, there'd be no Billy Wall. Billy Wall would have died in that field that day had Paris not.
Well, I passed that on to Nick, I think it was, and Nick came back and says, well, I don't know if I want one of those because, of some of the people who've got that's associated with that. And then I thought about it, and I said, yeah, but there's still a lot of guys associated with it that I would like to be in their company, like the Doolittle Raiders type.
Absolutely.
And hey, the Tuskegee Airmen. I mean, you've got guys who fought more than one front all the rest of their whole time in the military, and you can't take that away from them.
And if they ever do a citizen support thing, I will get it around to where it's signed. They need to do it. Y'all are owed that, and y'all deserve that. And for the families.
I told Nick we got a PUC for SOG, and that's
heavy duty.
And we got one for the 5th overall, and we got a
173rd got one, I think.
Who?
173rd got one, didn't
they? Well, they got him at different times, but not while I was there. When I didn't get one with them. I didn't earn one of those there. Okay. But the main thing is that they're not given out lightly.
Not at all. Not at all.
I'll tell you who somebody ought to be writing about it. That's the damn submarines.
Yeah. They
have pulled some incredible shit, and they're quiet and nobody talks about it. And I just wished we could get it, but at least somebody's smart enough to keep their noses clean and their mouths shut.
I'm working hard on I've got a Navy former captain that is trying to get me in touch with some submariners and stuff from not only WW2 but present that are still alive. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed on that as well.
If you see a guy in the submarine forces that is wearing Navy good conduct with a couple stars, and a national defense with a star, and a few other more or less good guy, I've been there ribbons. And then they've got a PUC with a couple of stars on it, the Navy PUC. They've been doing some stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But they're not going to be able to talk about it. And maybe they won't even be able to wear it now. I don't know. But I'll tell you, I met a guy the other day, in fact, downtown here, and we got to shooting the bull. And we know how to talk around a subject to figure out what's true and what isn't. And he had been there and done that, and we got a kick out of that.
Wow. I love how y'all can fill each other out without saying it directly and know exactly what the deal is.
Well, at one time, I didn't really care much about wannabes. It didn't bother me until I realized what so many of these wannabes and these fakes have done and what they've gained out of using those, the fakery. And when I worked for DynCorp in Iraq, one of the jobs they gave me was to read resumes.
Oh,
because
Lord.
I had the experience to pick out the bullshit, and I found a lot of guys talking stuff or claiming stuff that just couldn't have happened.
I can only imagine what you
saw.
Well,
that's another problem with I'm a semi-historian, so sometimes I know stuff that people don't expect me to know about other services and things. It's fun.
Oh, man. We're hoping you'll here in the next month or so after we get some stuff going. We'd love to have you back if you'd be open to come shooting the shit with us.
Sure, I'd be willing to come back and talk to folks, and we can have opposing opinions, and we can have a discussion. That doesn't bother me either.
We would absolutely love that. That's why I've tried to keep the fans interacted to where you can get some feedback and talk and chit chat. So without further ado, if you've got nothing else to close with for the day, we're going to sign off. And
adios, hasta luego, hombre.
Absolutely. Everyone is thanking you, and I'm thanking you, and I will stay in touch with you. All you have to do is hit the leave studio, and we're going to wrap up for the day. And I thank you very much, sir, for spending the afternoon with us.
Take care.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye.